Hey there, my amazing friends. Before we jump into today's video, I really need a little help from you. The channel is going through a rough patch, and your support truly matters. Let's try to reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments. If everyone watching gives just one like and writes a comment, we can make it happen easily. And remember to subscribe if you haven't yet. Alright, let's get started. Thank you so much for being here and supporting me. It means the world. You've been a park ranger at Howling Pines National Forest for 8 years now. And you thought you'd seen everything these Michigan woods could throw at you. Lost hikers, illegal campers, the occasional bear encounter, drunk teenagers thinking they're invincible, all part of the job. But nothing prepared you for the summer of 2024, when people started disappearing without a trace. The first was Carter Williams, a 23-year-old from Grand Rapids, who'd come up for a solo camping trip in June. His campsite at Cedar Lake was found perfectly intact, tent still staked, food still hanging in the bear canister, boots neatly placed outside the tent flap. The only signs of disturbance were the massive paw prints circling the site, too large for any known animal in Michigan. Then Cash Morrison vanished in July. The 35-year-old father of two had been fly fishing along Whisper Creek when his wife Emily called 911. She'd heard him screaming from their cabin a quarter-mile away. Not the kind of scream you make when you snag your line or slip on wet rocks. This was pure terror, she told you during the interview, her hands shaking as she poured coffee neither of you would drink. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, Emily said, staring out the cabin window toward the creek. Then nothing. Just silence. You'd organized the search parties yourself, combing every inch of the forest for 3 days. All you found was Cash's fishing rod snapped in half, and his tackle box scattered like something had batted it around with incredible force. The tracks you found nearby defied explanation, canine in shape but easily twice the size of the largest wolf track you'd ever seen, with claw marks that gouged deep into the earth. By August, the disappearances were making national news. Remy Patterson, a marine biology student from Michigan State, had been collecting water samples for her thesis when she simply vanished. Her research equipment was found floating in Whisper Creek, along with her field notebook, every page torn to shreds. The media dubbed it the Howling Pines Mystery, sending reporters and amateur investigators flooding into your forest. You spent more time managing crowds than actually investigating, watching helplessly as evidence got trampled and contaminated. The pressure from above was mounting too. State officials wanted answers, families wanted closure, and you had nothing to give them but oversized paw prints and theories that sounded insane even to yourself. That's when you started staying late at the ranger station, poring over incident reports from decades past. What you found in the dusty filing cabinets made your blood run cold. Missing persons cases stretching back to the 1940s, all following the same pattern. Campers, hikers, fishermen, all vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only signs of struggle and those impossible tracks. The old-timers in the area had a name for what took them: Dogman. Most of the reports dismissed it as local folklore, the kind of legend that grows around any dense forest. But the consistency was disturbing. Descriptions from survivors and witnesses going back generations all painted the same picture. A massive creature, part man and part wolf, standing upright on powerful hind legs. 7 feet tall or more, covered in dark fur, with glowing yellow eyes and fangs that could crush bone. You'd always prided yourself on being rational, scientific. You believed in facts, evidence, logical explanations. But as September arrived and the disappearances continued, rationality was becoming a luxury you couldn't afford. Zane Cooper, an experienced woodsman and hunting guide, had vanished just 2 days ago. His hunting party found his rifle torn in half, the metal barrel twisted like a pretzel. Tonight, you're alone in the station, spreading out topographical maps and marking every disappearance with red pins. The pattern is unmistakable. They're all clustered around the deepest, most remote sections of the forest, areas where the old-growth pines block out most of the sunlight and create a perpetual twilight beneath their branches. A sound from outside makes you look up from the maps. It's barely audible through the station's thick walls, but unmistakably organic. Not the bark of a coyote or the howl of a wolf. Something else entirely. Something that makes your skin crawl and your hand instinctively reach for the service weapon on your belt. The sound comes again, closer this time. A low, rumbling growl that seems to vibrate through the very foundation of the building. You move to the window, peering out into the darkness beyond the station's floodlights. The forest looks innocent enough, just shadows and moonlight painting everything in shades of gray. But you know better now. You know what's out there in those shadows hunting. Your radio crackles to life, making you jump. It's Omar Rodriguez, your colleague working the night shift at the north entrance. "Hey, you still at the station?" Omar's voice carries an edge of concern. "I'm getting some weird calls from campers at Devil's Backbone campground. They're reporting strange noises, something moving around the perimeter of the camp." You grab the radio, your mouth suddenly dry. Devil's Backbone is one of the remotest campgrounds in the park, surrounded by miles of dense forest. If the creature is there now, those campers are sitting ducks. "How many people are we talking about?" you ask, already reaching for your gear. "Maybe 15, 20 people total, mostly families with kids." Omar pauses. "Should I call the state police?" You consider it. The state police have been cooperative, but they're stretched thin across multiple counties, and their response time to Devil's Backbone would be at least an hour. Those families don't have an hour if your worst fears are correct. "Negative," you say, clipping the radio to your belt. "I'm heading out there now. Keep monitoring the radio and call for backup if you don't hear from me within 2 hours." "Roger that. Be careful out there." You load your truck with everything you might need. Flares, emergency medical supplies, your heavy-duty flashlight, and extra ammunition for your sidearm. As you drive through the winding forest roads toward Devil's Backbone, you can't shake the feeling that you're driving toward a confrontation that's been years in the making. The headlights of your truck pierce the darkness ahead, but the forest seems to press in from all sides, creating a tunnel of shadows that swallows your light. Every now and then, you catch a glimpse of movement in your peripheral vision, something large and dark keeping pace with your vehicle through the trees. By the time you reach Devil's Backbone, you're gripping the steering wheel so tightly, your knuckles have gone white. The campground appears peaceful at first glance. Several tents are scattered around the area, with a few RVs parked near the main loop. Campfires are still burning, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. But something's wrong. It's too quiet. No voices, no sounds of activity that you'd expect from a campground full of families. Even the insects have fallen silent, as if the entire forest is holding its breath. You park near the campground entrance and step out of your truck, your hand resting on your weapon. The smell hits you immediately, something wild and predatory, like wet dog mixed with something fouler, something that doesn't belong in these woods. A child's scream pierces the silence, high and terrified, coming from somewhere deeper in the campground. Then another scream, and another, as panic spreads through the camp like wildfire. You break into a run, your flashlight beam dancing wildly as you sprint toward the sounds of terror. Whatever's happening, you're about to come face to face with the thing that's been haunting Howling Pines for decades. The thing they call Dog Man. The screaming leads you to the far end of the campground, where the forest presses closest to the campsites. Your flashlight beam sweeps across overturned picnic tables and scattered camping gear as you run, the chaos telling a story of people fleeing in blind panic. You find them huddled together near the restroom building, maybe a dozen campers, adults clutching children, everyone wild-eyed with terror. Emerson Blake, a man in his 40s wearing a Michigan State t-shirt, spots your ranger uniform and rushes toward you. "Thank God you're here," he gasps, pointing toward a cluster of tents that have been shredded to ribbons. "That thing took Knox and his family. Just grabbed them and dragged them into the woods. We tried to stop it, but..." He trails off, staring at your service weapon. Even in the darkness, you can see the hopelessness in his eyes. Whatever he saw out there, a pistol seems laughably inadequate. "How long ago?" you ask, helping a crying woman to her feet. Her name tag reads Rory. Probably a teacher, considering the Jefferson Elementary logo on her jacket. Maybe 10 minutes, Emerson says. We called 911, but they said it would be at least an hour before anyone could get here. You nod, doing quick mental calculations. Knox and his family could still be alive, but not for long if the pattern holds. The thing you're hunting doesn't keep prisoners, it kills quickly and efficiently, then drags the bodies away to wherever it lairs. I need everyone to get in their vehicles right now, you say, raising your voice to address the entire group. Drive to the ranger station and wait there. Don't stop for anything. Don't get out of your cars until you reach the main road. What about Knox? Asks Marco Gutierrez, a young man with blood on his t-shirt, probably from trying to help during the attack. We can't just leave them. I'm going after them, you say, checking your gear one more time. But I need you people safe first. That thing might come back. As the survivors pack into their vehicles, you study the scene of the attack more carefully. Knox's campsite looks like it was hit by a tornado. The family tent is completely destroyed, support poles snapped like toothpicks. Deep gouges in the earth show where massive claws found purchase as something incredibly strong dragged its prey toward the tree line. The tracks are the clearest you've seen yet. Definitely canine, but impossibly large. Each paw print is nearly a foot long, with claw marks extending several inches beyond the pads. The stride length suggests something moving on two legs, covering ground with the efficiency of a predator born to hunt. You follow the trail into the forest, your flashlight creating a narrow cone of visibility in the oppressive darkness. The tracks lead deeper into the wilderness, toward the heart of howling pines where the trees grow so thick that daylight barely penetrates even at noon. Behind you, you hear car engines starting as the survivors follow your instructions. At least they'll be safe. Now you just have to pray you're not too late for Knox and his family. The forest grows denser as you follow the trail, branches catching at your uniform and forcing you to duck under low-hanging limbs. The creature's path is easy to follow. Broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, and occasional drops of blood that glisten darkly in your flashlight beam. After about half a mile, you hear something that makes your blood freeze. A human voice, weak but unmistakably alive, calling for help somewhere ahead of you. You quicken your pace, pushing through a thick stand of pine saplings, and emerge into a small clearing. What you see there will haunt your dreams for the rest of your life. Knox Davidson, a man in his 30s, is tied to a massive oak tree with what looks like strips of bark. His face is bloody, one eye swollen shut, but he's conscious and alert. 20 feet away, his wife Preston and their twin daughters, who can't be more than 8 years old, are bound to another tree. They're alive, but they're bait. You realize this just as something massive crashes through the undergrowth behind you. You spin around, drawing your weapon, and come face to face with the thing that's been terrorizing Howling Pines for decades. The dogman stands nearly 8 feet tall, its muscular frame covered in coarse dark fur that seems to absorb your flashlight beam. Its head is distinctly canine, elongated snout filled with teeth like railroad spikes, ears that twitch at every sound. But its eyes are disturbingly human, showing an intelligence that no animal should possess. It moves on its hind legs with surprising grace for something so large, powerful arms ending in clawed hands that could tear a man in half. When it sees you, it tilts its head slightly, studying you with those horrible, knowing eyes. Let them go, you say, raising your weapon. Your voice sounds steadier than you feel. This is between you and me now. The creature's lips pull back in what might be a grin, revealing rows of fangs designed for rending flesh from bone. It makes a sound, not quite a howl, not quite a laugh, but something that combines the worst aspects of both. Then it moves. You've never seen anything so large move so fast. 1 second it's 20 feet away, the next it's on you, claws raking across your chest and sending you flying backward into a tree. Your weapon goes spinning into the darkness as you hit the oak hard enough to knock the wind from your lungs. The dogman doesn't follow up immediately. Instead, it retrieves your pistol with surprising delicacy, examining the weapon with something approaching curiosity before crushing it in one massive hand. The metal screams as it deforms, pieces dropping to the forest floor like broken toys. "It's playing with us," Knox gasps from his position tied to the tree. "It could have killed us already, but it's enjoying this." You struggle to your feet, tasting blood. The claw marks across your chest are painful but not deep. The creature held back, you realize. It wants you alive, at least for now. The dogman circles the clearing, never taking its eyes off you. Each footstep shakes the ground slightly, and you can hear its breathing. Deep, controlled, patient. It's savoring this moment, the terror in its prey's eyes. That's when you remember the flares in your gear belt. Your hand moves slowly toward the emergency kit, hoping the creature won't notice the movement. But those intelligent eyes miss nothing. The dogman's head tilts again, and you see something like amusement in its expression. It wants to see what you'll do. You grab the flare and strike it against the ignition strip. Brilliant red light floods the clearing, and for just a moment, the dogman recoils, raising one clawed hand to shield its sensitive eyes. That moment of distraction is all you need. You hurl the burning flare directly at the creature's face, then immediately light a second one. The dogman roars, a sound that seems to shake the very trees, and stumbles backward, pawing at its eyes. "Knox!" you shout, running toward the bound family with your survival knife drawn. "Get ready to move!" You slice through Knox's bonds first, then help him free his family while the dogman thrashes in the red-lit clearing, temporarily blinded but already recovering. Knox scoops up one daughter while Preston grabs the other, and you all run for the tree line. But you know running won't be enough. The dogman knows these woods better than you ever will, and once its vision clears, it will hunt you down with methodical efficiency. You need a plan, and you need it fast. As your small group crashes through the underbrush, you think about everything you know about the creature. It's incredibly strong and fast, but the flare affected it. Maybe it has other weaknesses you can exploit. Maybe there's still a way to survive this nightmare. Behind you, the roaring stops, and you know the hunt is about to begin in earnest. Your group stumbles through the dark forest, trying to put distance between yourselves and the creature, while making as little noise as possible. Knox carries 8-year-old Lennon while Preston struggles with her twin sister Archer. Both girls are in shock, too terrified to cry, which might be the only thing keeping you alive right now. You lead them toward what you hope is safety, an old fire lookout tower about 2 miles north of the clearing. Built in the 1960s and abandoned years ago, it's one of the few structures in this part of the forest that might offer some protection. If you can reach it, you might be able to radio for help or at least have the high ground advantage. The forest is eerily quiet around you. No night sounds, no insects. Nothing but the soft whisper of your footsteps on the pine needle carpet. Even the wind has died down as if nature itself is holding its breath. "Is it following us?" Preston whispers, shifting Archer's weight in her arms. You pause, listening carefully. No sounds of pursuit, no breaking branches or heavy footfalls. But that doesn't mean anything. The dogman could be stalking you silently, staying just beyond your hearing while it chooses the perfect moment to strike. "Keep moving," you say quietly. "We're almost there." The fire tower looms out of the darkness like a skeletal finger pointing at the stars. 50 feet of steel framework topped by a small observation cabin. It's seen better days but looks structurally sound. More importantly, there's only one way up, a narrow ladder that would force any pursuer to climb in the open. You test the ladder's stability, then gesture for Knox to start climbing with Lennon. "Go quickly, but don't make noise," you whisper. "I'll come up last." As the family makes their way up the tower, you keep watch on the surrounding forest. Your flashlight is dimmed to preserve battery life, creating just enough illumination to see immediate threats. The red flare burned out long ago, leaving you in the blue-black darkness of a moonless night. That's when you see them, 2 golden points of light moving through the trees about 100 yards away. The dogman's eyes, reflecting what little starlight filters through the canopy. It's found your trail and is closing in, but slowly. deliberately, like it knows exactly where you're going. You scramble up the ladder, taking the rungs 2 at a time. Behind you, you can hear heavy footsteps now, no longer bothering with stealth. The creature knows you're trapped. The observation cabin is cramped but solid, with thick wooden walls and windows on all sides. Knox has barricaded the door with an old desk while Preston comforts the girls in one corner. You immediately go for the radio equipment, hoping against hope that some of it still works. Most of the gear is ancient and corroded, but you manage to coax life from an old emergency radio. Static fills the air, then clears to reveal Omar's voice coming through weakly. Base to Ranger 7, do you copy? You grab the microphone. Omar, this is an emergency. I'm at the old fire tower with 4 civilians. We're under attack by something in the woods. I need immediate backup, every unit you can spare. Roger that. State police are already en route to Devil's Backbone. What's your exact situation? Before you can answer, the tower shakes. Not violently, but enough to rattle the windows and make everyone in the cabin go quiet. Something very large and very strong has just struck the base of the tower. You move to the window and look down. In the darkness below, you can barely make out a massive shape circling the tower's base. As you watch, it rears up on its hind legs and places its front paws against the steel framework. The entire structure groans under the pressure. It's trying to bring down the tower, you say into the radio. I don't think this thing will hold much longer. Another impact, stronger this time. Books fall from shelves, and one of the windows develops a spiderweb of cracks. The dogman is systematically attacking the tower's support struts, and from the sound of screaming metal, it's succeeding. Knox joins you at the window, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. What does it want with us? Why doesn't it just leave? That's when you notice something that changes everything. In your flashlight beam, you can see deep gouges in the cabin's wooden walls, claw marks that match the ones you've been finding at attack sites. Old marks weathered by years of exposure. This isn't random, you realize, running your fingers along the scratches. This tower, it's been here before, maybe many times. You search the cabin more thoroughly, pushing aside decades of accumulated debris. In a corner beneath some moldy canvas, you find a metal strongbox that's been hidden away. The lock is corroded but still functional, and you manage to force it open with your survival knife. Inside are dozens of photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten reports dating back to the 1960s, all documenting encounters with the same creature that's currently trying to kill you. One photograph stops you cold. It shows a group of hunters from 1967, posing with their rifles next to what's obviously the dogman's body. The creature is lying on its side, clearly dead, with multiple bullet wounds visible in its torso. But if they killed it in 1967, what's stalking you now? You flip through more photos, finding similar shots from different decades. The dogman's body with different groups of hunters, different wounds, different backgrounds. 1973, 1981, 1994, 2003. My God, you whisper, understanding flooding through you like ice water. They keep killing it, but it keeps coming back. The tower shakes again, more violently this time. Through the fractured window, you can hear the creature below making sounds you've never heard before. Not growls or roars, but something almost like speech. Guttural, inhuman, but with a rhythm and cadence that suggests language. Preston has noticed the photographs and is looking through them with growing horror. Look at this, she says, holding up a yellowed newspaper clipping. From the Traverse City Record Eagle, 1952, local woodsman claims to have killed Devil Dog, and this one from 1963, Monster of Howling Pines finally destroyed. The pattern is clear. Every few years, someone claims to have killed the Dogman. There are always photographs, always witnesses, always relief in the community. But the disappearances never stop for long. After a few months or a year of peace, people start vanishing again. A new photograph catches your attention. This one much more recent, probably from the 1990s based on the clothing styles. It shows a young park ranger, probably not much older than you, standing over the Dogman's corpse. The ranger's name tag is just visible. C. Morrison. Morrison. That name is familiar, but you can't place it immediately. Then you remember Cash Morrison, the fisherman who disappeared in July. His wife Emily had mentioned that his father was a park ranger here in the 1990s. The families, you say, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. It's targeting families of people who killed it before. Knox looks up from the photographs. What do you mean? Every person who's disappeared this summer, I bet if we checked, we'd find their fathers or grandfathers are in these photos. The dog man isn't just hunting randomly, it's getting revenge. The tower lurches suddenly, tilting at least 10 degrees before settling back. Metal screams in protest, and you realize you're out of time. The structure won't survive another assault like that. But now you understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just some mindless beast, it's something that remembers, something that holds grudges across generations, something that refuses to stay dead. And if the pattern holds, killing it again won't solve anything. It will just ensure that your own children years from now become its targets. The radio crackles back to life. Ranger 7, State Police are 20 minutes out. Can you hold your position? You look around the tilting cabin at the terrified family huddled in the corner, at the photographs scattered across the floor. 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. Negative, you say into the microphone. We're abandoning this position. If anyone gets through on this frequency, tell them to look for survivors at... You pause, thinking quickly. Where can you go that might offer better protection? Then you remember something from the old files back at the station. There was one place in all of Howling Pines where no disappearances had ever occurred. One area the dogman seemed to avoid completely. The old Native American burial ground, 3 miles east of the tower. Tell them to search near the burial ground on Pine Ridge, you say, and tell them to bring everything they've got. This thing isn't going to stop. You turn to Knox and Preston. We're leaving, right now. Stay close together and don't look back no matter what you hear. Outside, the dogman has gone silent, but you know it's still there, waiting. As you prepare to lead this family into the darkness, you can only hope that the old legends about sacred ground hold some truth. Because if they don't, you're all going to die tonight. The descent from the tower is the longest 30 seconds of your life. You go first, testing each rung to make sure the creature's assault hasn't weakened the ladder's connection to the framework. Knox follows with Lennon, then Preston carrying Archer, moving as quickly as they dare in the darkness. You're halfway down when the tower shudders again. The dogman hasn't given up its assault. It's just been waiting for you to come back within reach. You shine your flashlight toward the base of the structure and catch a glimpse of massive claws wrapped around one of the support beams. Move faster, you whisper urgently. It knows we're coming down. Your feet hit solid ground just as another impact rocks the tower. This time, you hear the distinctive sound of metal beginning to fail. A high-pitched groan followed by sharp pops as rivets give way. The entire structure is starting to lean at a dangerous angle. Knox drops to the ground behind you, immediately reaching up to help Preston with Archer. The 8-year-old is barely conscious, exhaustion and shock taking their toll. Her sister Lennon is in better shape but clearly terrified, clinging to her father's neck as he lifts her down. You don't wait for the family to get organized. The moment Preston's feet touch earth, you're already moving toward the tree line, away from the tower and the creature that's been using it as a toy. The forest seems even darker now, if that's possible. Your flashlight beam barely penetrates 10 feet into the undergrowth, creating more shadows than it eliminates. But you know these woods better than most, and the burial ground on Pine Ridge is burned into your memory from countless search and rescue operations over the years. 3 miles northeast, following the old deer trail that winds along Whisper Creek, before climbing into the hills. If the legends are true, if sacred ground really can offer protection from things like the dogman, then it's your only hope. Behind you, the tower finally succumbs to the creature's assault. The crash echoes through the forest like thunder, followed by a roar of triumph that makes your skin crawl. The dogman has destroyed your refuge and knows you're on the run. Why aren't we heading toward the road? Preston gasps, struggling to keep up while carrying Archer. Shouldn't we be trying to reach the police? It would catch us long before we reached help, you explain, pushing through a thick stand of saplings. Our only chance is to reach someplace it won't or can't follow. Knox shifts Lennon's weight in his arms. The burial ground you mentioned, you really think that'll work? Honestly, you have no idea. The stories about the Pine Ridge burial ground being protected are mostly local folklore, passed down through generations of Native Americans and early settlers. The Ojibwe tribe that once lived in this area considered it sacred, a place where the spirits of their ancestors watched over the land. But folklore is all you have left. Everything else, weapons, backup, rational explanations, has failed against the dogman. Sometimes the old stories are the only truth that matters. You follow Whisper Creek for nearly a mile, using the sound of running water to guide you through the darkness. The family struggles to keep pace, especially Preston with Archer growing heavier in her arms, but you can't afford to slow down. Every minute you spend on the trail gives the dogman more time to close the distance. The creature is following. You can feel its presence like a weight pressing against your back. Occasionally you catch glimpses of those golden eyes reflecting your flashlight beam, staying just at the edge of visibility. It's not rushing to attack, though. It's herding you, driving you toward some predetermined killing ground. Or maybe it knows where you're headed and finds the idea amusing. Maybe sacred ground means nothing to something that's died and returned multiple times over the decades. The trail begins to climb as you leave the creek behind, winding up into the hills where the oldest trees and howling pines grow in silent majesty. These are the giants that were here when the first Europeans arrived. Massive white pines that have weathered centuries of storms and seasons. And somewhere among them, on a hill that rises above the forest like a green island, lies the burial ground that might be your salvation. Knox is starting to struggle with Lennon's weight, and you can hear Preston breathing heavily behind you. The girls are beyond exhaustion, barely conscious as their parents carry them through the nightmare landscape. How much further? Knox asks, sweat streaming down his face despite the cool night air. Maybe half a mile, you say, checking your compass by flashlight. The trail gets steeper from here, but we're almost there. That's when you hear it. The sound you've been dreading. Heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush, no longer bothering with stealth. The dogman has decided to end this game. Run, you say, breaking into a sprint. Don't look back, just run. The family follows as best they can, Knox and Preston stumbling over roots and rocks in the darkness while you light the way ahead. Behind you, the sounds of pursuit grow closer. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, and underneath it all, that horrible panting breath. The trail reaches its steepest section, climbing sharply toward the ridgeline. Your legs burn with the effort, and you can only imagine how the others are suffering. But the alternative is worse than exhaustion. Then, through the trees ahead, you see it. A break in the canopy where starlight filters down to illuminate a small clearing on the hilltop. The burial ground on Pine Ridge, marked by a ring of standing stones that have weathered centuries of wind and rain. There, you shout, pointing toward the clearing. That's it! You reach the edge of the sacred space just as the dogman crashes out of the forest behind you, moving with terrifying speed despite its size. It covers the distance between the trees and the stone circle in 3 massive strides, claws extended to tear you apart. But something stops it. The creature skids to a halt just inches from the nearest standing stone, as if it's run into an invisible wall. It snarls and tests the boundary, reaching one clawed hand toward the circle but pulls back as if burned. You don't waste time questioning why it worked. You grab Knox and Preston, pulling them and the girls into the center of the stone circle. The moment you cross the boundary, you feel it, a sense of peace and safety that seems impossible given your circumstances. The dogman circles the burial ground like a caged animal, testing the perimeter but unable to cross. Its golden eyes burn with frustrated rage as it realizes its prey has found sanctuary. My God, Preston whispers, setting Archer down on the soft grass within the circle. It actually worked? Knox collapses beside his daughters, exhaustion finally overwhelming him. How is this possible? What is this place? You sink down onto one of the fallen stones, your body shaking from adrenaline and relief. The Ojibwe believed this was a place where the spirit world touched the physical world. They said their ancestors' spirits protected anyone who sought refuge here. The dogman has stopped pacing and is now sitting on its haunches just outside the stone circle, watching you with those disturbingly intelligent eyes. It's not going anywhere. It's willing to wait you out, knowing you can't stay here forever. So what now? Knox asks. We just wait for the police to find us? That's when you notice something else about the creature's behavior. It's not just watching you. It's looking at something specific. Following its gaze, you see that it's focused on one particular stone in the circle, a tall granite monolith covered in carved symbols. Getting closer to examine the stone, you realize the symbols aren't Ojibwe at all. They're much older, carved by people who lived in this area long before any known Native American tribes. And at the base of the stone, partially hidden by moss and age, is something that makes your blood run cold. More photographs, like the ones you found in the fire tower. But these are much older, dating back to the early 1900s. They show the same scene, groups of men standing over the dogman's corpse, but the backgrounds are different. These kills didn't happen in howling pines. They happened all across the Great Lakes region in different forests, different states, going back more than a century. And in every photograph, the creature looks exactly the same. Not aged, not changed, just constant. One photograph stops you cold. It's from 1923, showing a young man in ranger gear standing over the dogman's body somewhere in the forests of northern Wisconsin. The man's face is strangely familiar, and when you read the inscription on the back, you understand why. William Morrison, first documented kill, Chequamegon National Forest. Morrison, Cash Morrison's grandfather. The bloodline goes back 3 generations, and the dogman has been hunting them for over a century. You look up at the creature watching you from beyond the stone circle. Those golden eyes hold more than animal intelligence. They hold the accumulated rage of something that has been killed dozens of times but refuses to stay dead. Something that remembers every face, every family, every injustice. And as dawn approaches on the horizon, you realize that sacred ground or not, this confrontation is far from over. The dogman isn't just a monster, it's a force of nature seeking balance, and it won't rest until the scales are even. The question is, what will it take to finally put this thing to rest? Dawn comes slowly to Pine Ridge, painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and gold. You've been awake all night, watching the dogman maintain its vigil outside the stone circle. It hasn't moved from its position, hasn't shown any signs of fatigue or impatience. It simply waits, like death itself. Knox and Preston have managed to get a few hours of sleep, exhaustion overcoming fear. The twins, Lennon and Archer, are curled up together on a bed of pine needles, still unconscious from the trauma of the night. You envy them their escape from this waking nightmare. Your radio has been silent since the tower fell, the old emergency unit probably damaged beyond repair. But in the growing daylight, you can see a faint trail of smoke rising from the valley below, probably the state police, searching the remains of the fire tower. Help is out there, but it might as well be on the moon. The dogman seems to sense your thoughts. It turns its massive head toward the smoke, then looks back at you with what might be amusement. It knows the authorities are coming, and it doesn't care. Whatever protection the burial ground offers, it won't last forever. There has to be a way to end this, you say, speaking as much to yourself as to the creature. You can't just keep killing people forever. To your surprise, the dogman reacts to your voice. Its ears perk up, and it tilts its head in that disturbingly human gesture. For a moment you think you see something other than rage in those golden eyes, something like sadness. That's when you notice the newest photographs scattered around the base of the stone monolith. These aren't old, weathered images from decades past. These are recent, probably taken within the last few weeks. They show the dogman's latest victims. Not dead, but alive and apparently unharmed, standing in what looks like a cave or underground chamber. Carter Williams, the first to disappear. Cash Morrison, the fisherman. Remy Patterson, the grad student. All the people you assumed were dead, all apparently being kept somewhere. But why? You study the photographs more carefully, looking for clues about their location. The walls of the chamber are natural stone, probably limestone based on the formations visible in the background. There are symbols carved into the walls, the same ancient markings you've seen on the standing stones. Knox, you say quietly, not wanting to wake the girls. Take a look at these. Knox examines the photographs with growing excitement. They're alive? All of them? Looks that way, but I don't understand why the dogman would keep prisoners. Every account I've read describes it as a killer, not a kidnapper. The creature outside the circle makes a sound, not a growl or a roar, but something almost like a whine. A sound of frustration or loss? Looking at it more carefully in the daylight, you notice things you missed in the darkness. The dogman's fur is grizzled with patches of gray, its movements slightly stiff as if from old injuries. This isn't a young, aggressive predator. This is something ancient, tired, carrying the weight of decades. More pieces of the puzzle click into place. The photographs showing it being killed over and over again. The targeting of specific family lines. The careful preservation of victims rather than simple slaughter. It's not revenge, you realize suddenly. It's recruitment. Knox looks at you like you've lost your mind. What are you talking about? Think about it. Every person who's disappeared has a connection to someone who killed the dogman in the past. It's not taking them to hurt them, it's taking them to replace them. To build some kind of family. The dogman's reaction confirms your theory. It nods slowly, an unmistakably human gesture. And for the first time since this nightmare began, you don't see rage in its eyes. You see loneliness. Preston has woken up and is listening to your conversation with growing horror. Replace them? Replace them with what? You don't answer immediately because you're not sure you want to voice what you're thinking. But the evidence is right there in front of you. The creature's intelligence, its ability to plan and remember, its seemingly supernatural resilience. I think, you say carefully, that the dogman isn't just one creature. I think it's a condition, something that can be passed on. The implications are staggering. If you're right, then everyone who's ever claimed to kill the dogman didn't actually kill it. They just forced it to find a new host. And now it's trying to build a pack, recruiting descendants of its former killers to join it in whatever cursed existence it inhabits. Your radio suddenly crackles to life, startling everyone in the circle. Omar's voice comes through clearly, stronger than it was last night. Ranger 7, this is base. State police have reached the tower site. What's your current position? You grab the radio, hope flaring in your chest. Base, we're at the Pine Ridge burial ground. 4 civilians with me, all alive. But we have a situation here that requires immediate assistance. Roger that. Helicopters en route to your location for extraction. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. You look at the dogman, still watching patiently from beyond the stone circle. Will the helicopter's arrival force it to retreat? Or will it see the aircraft as just another threat to eliminate? As if reading your thoughts, the creature stands and walks closer to the circle's edge. When it speaks, its voice is like gravel mixed with wind, barely human but unmistakably intelligent. No. More. Running. The words hit you like physical blows. The dogman can speak. Has always been able to speak. Everything you thought you knew about this creature crumbles in an instant. What do you want? You ask, trying to keep your voice steady. Family, it says, the word dripping with loneliness that spans decades. Tired of being alone. Knox pulls his daughters closer, his face pale with understanding. You want to take our children. The dogman shakes its massive head. Want to give them purpose, power, forever. Now you understand the true horror of what you're facing. The Dogman isn't just a monster, it's a corrupted form of immortality, a curse that grants eternal life at the cost of everything human. And it's been trying to share that curse with the descendants of those who've heard it. The people you took, you say, they're still human? Changing, the creature replies. Becoming. Like me. Like you. Could be. The offer hangs in the air like poison. Eternal life, incredible power, but at what cost? You think about the photographs in the cave, about Cash Morrison and the others. Are they still themselves, or have they become something else entirely? The sound of helicopter rotors grows audible in the distance. The Dogman hears it too, its ears swiveling toward the approaching aircraft. For the first time since dawn, it looks agitated. Choose, it says, fixing you with those golden eyes. Come, willingly, or I take them. Anyway. The sacred ground won't protect you forever, and you know it. The burial ground might keep the Dogman at bay temporarily, but it can't hold off a creature with unlimited time and patience. Eventually you'll have to leave this circle, and when you do, it will be waiting. But there might be another way. The photographs from the cave show symbols carved into the walls, the same markings that appear on the standing stones. If the burial ground has power over the creature, maybe those symbols are the key to understanding how to use that power. You make your decision. I'll come with you, you say, stepping toward the edge of the circle. But you let the family go, and you take me to where you're keeping the others. No! Knox jumps to his feet, grabbing your arm. You can't trust that thing. The Dogman watches your approach with something like respect. When you reach the boundary of the sacred ground, it extends one massive clawed hand. Your word, you say, not moving any closer. Promise me they'll be safe. Safe. The creature agrees. Always. Safe. You have my word. You look back at Knox, Preston, and the girls one last time, then step across the stone circle's boundary. The moment your foot touches the ground outside the protected area, you feel it. A presence pressing against your mind, ancient and tired and desperately lonely. The Dogman's hand closes around yours with surprising gentleness. Its claws could tear you apart, but they barely leave marks on your skin. This close, you can see the intelligence in its eyes more clearly, along with something else. Hope. The others, you say as the helicopter grows louder overhead. Show me. The creature nods and begins walking toward the forest, pulling you along. Behind you, you can hear Knox shouting your name, but you don't look back. This is the only way to save them, and maybe, just maybe, the only way to finally put an end to the Dogman's century-long hunt. As you disappear into the trees, the last thing you hear is the helicopter landing in the burial ground, come to rescue a family that no longer needs rescuing. But your own fate remains very much in question. The cave system beneath Howling Pines is vast and ancient, carved by underground rivers that dried up millennia ago. The Dogman leads you through passages that seem to go on forever, lit by phosphorescent fungi that cast everything in an eerie green glow. Finally, you emerge into a large chamber where your worst fears and greatest hopes are confirmed. Cash Morrison is there, along with Carter Williams, Remy Patterson, and 24 others you don't recognize. They're alive, but changed. Taller, stronger, with eyes that reflect light like animals. Still human, but becoming something else. You came, Cash says, his voice deeper than you remember. I was hoping someone would figure it out eventually. Figure what out, you ask, though you think you already know. The Dogman isn't the curse, Cash explains, gesturing to the symbols carved into the chamber walls. The Dogman is what happens when the curse has no one left to share itself with. We're the cure. He shows you the truth in the ancient markings. The curse was created centuries ago by Native American shamans as a last resort against settlers who were destroying their land. But it was never meant to create a solitary monster. It was supposed to create a pack of guardians, protectors who would ensure the forest's survival. Instead, generation after generation of humans killed the transformed guardians, forcing the curse to jump from host to host, growing more lonely and desperate with each passing decade. So what happens now, you ask? Cash smiles, and for a moment he looks completely human again. Now we have enough people to break the cycle. The dog man doesn't have to be alone anymore, and the forest gets the protectors it was always meant to have. The transformation, when it comes, is surprisingly painless. You feel your senses expanding, your strength increasing, your connection to the forest deepening until every tree, every stream, every living thing becomes part of your awareness. When it's over, you understand why the dog man spent so many decades gathering his pack. The loneliness of carrying such a burden alone would drive anyone to desperate measures. But now there are enough of you to share the responsibility, to protect howling pines without the need for violence or fear. The disappearances will stop. The killings will end. And somewhere in the world above, families like Knox's will continue to camp and hike and fish, never knowing they're being watched over by guardians who were once human themselves. It's not the ending you expected when this nightmare began. But as you feel the last of your humanity merge with something larger and more ancient, you realize it might be the ending the forest always deserved. The dogman, your predecessor, your teacher, your pack leader, finally allows himself to rest, knowing his vigil can continue in other hands, in other paws. The hunt is over. The protection has just begun. My name is Silas McCleary, and this happened to me in 2013 in New River Gorge National Park and Preserve. I took the transfer for quiet nights and empty sandstone walls, thinking I'd escape the chaos of my previous posting at Yellowstone, where crowds of tourists turned every shift into crowd control. How wrong I was. Some places have a way of calling to the darkness, and the gorge, with its endless caverns carved by centuries of rushing water, was one of them. The job sounded simple enough when Gary briefed me that first morning. Patrol the endless walls, check climbing anchors, keep the campgrounds clean. The pay was decent, the scenery spectacular, and best of all, the visitor numbers were manageable. What Gary didn't mention in that sterile government briefing room was the way sound carried in the gorge, how a whisper at the base of the cliffs could echo for what felt like miles through the limestone passages beneath. How the mist that rose from the river each dawn seemed to carry more than just moisture. It brought whispers of things long buried in the dark. June storms had swollen the New River into something monstrous, the kind of churning brown water that swallows whole trees and spits them out miles downstream as splinters. The water moved with a violence that seemed almost alive, angry at being confined between the ancient walls that had taken millions of years to carve. When I stood on the rim that first week, watching the torrent below, I felt something watching me back. It was a ridiculous thought, the kind of paranoid notion that comes from spending too much time alone in wild places, but I couldn't shake it. 2 climbers vanished on a dawn approach, and the district office wanted a boots-on-ground search while the county handled publicity. I was the boots. Frank, my supervisor, called it a routine recovery operation, but there was something in his voice that suggested otherwise. The way he avoided eye contact when he handed me the search parameters. The way he lingered at the door of his office, as if he wanted to say something more but thought better of it. "Just stick to the established trails, McCleary," he'd said finally. "Don't go wandering off into areas that aren't on the maps." It was an odd warning. Rangers are trained to go where others can't or won't. But Frank had been working the gorge for 15 years, and there was something in his weathered face that spoke of hard-earned wisdom. Still, I was new, eager to prove myself, and confident in my abilities. I should have listened. The first sign sat at the base of Fern Point, a neat pile of river stones, each stone streaked with dried blood that had turned rust brown in the humid air. Someone, or something, had arranged them shoulder-high against the cliff face, dead center on the approach trail where no climber could miss them. The arrangement was too deliberate to be natural, too precise to be the work of animals. Each stone had been carefully selected for size and color, stacked with an almost ritualistic precision that made my skin crawl. I circled the cairn slowly, looking for boot prints, claw marks, any sign of who or what might have built it. The ground around the base was smooth river sand, undisturbed except for my own footprints. No boot treads, no paw prints, nothing to suggest how the stones had gotten there. The silence was complete. No bird songs, no rustle of leaves in the wind that I could feel brushing against my face. Even the ever-present buzz of insects had died away, as if the very presence of the cairn had created a dead zone in the natural world. There was a cold iron smell that rode the mist rising from the river, sharp and metallic like old pennies left in the rain. It caught in the back of my throat and made me want to spit, but when I did, the taste lingered. I bagged a sample of the blood-streaked stone and radioed it in, describing the location and appearance with the clinical detachment they'd trained into me at the academy. "Dispatch to Ranger McCleary," came the crackling reply. "Probably just black bears making art projects. They're curious creatures." Joseph, the dispatcher, was chuckling as he said it, and I could picture him in the climate-controlled comfort of the visitor center, feet up on his desk, thinking about lunch. To him, this was just another oddity to file away and forget. But he hadn't seen the cairn, hadn't felt the wrongness that radiated from it like heat from blacktop. He hadn't breathed in that metallic stench that seemed to coat the inside of my lungs. I didn't laugh. Couldn't laugh. There was something about the arrangement that spoke to intelligence far beyond what any bear possessed. Something that understood symbolism and territory marking in ways that made my ranger training feel woefully inadequate. As I walked away from Fern Point, I could feel the cairn behind me, like a weight between my shoulder blades. Every few steps, I found myself turning to look back, half expecting to find it had moved or multiplied. That evening, I sat in my government-issue trailer reviewing the day's notes and trying to rationalize what I'd seen. The stones were just stones. The blood was probably from some animal that had cut itself on the sharp edges. The precise arrangement was just a coincidence, or perhaps the work of some hiker with too much time and a twisted sense of humor. But even as I wrote these explanations in my official log, I didn't believe them. The trailer's thin walls did nothing to muffle the sounds of the gorge at night. Water rushing over rocks, wind moaning through the canyon, the occasional crash of a tree falling somewhere in the darkness. But beneath these familiar sounds, I began to notice something else, a rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from deep underground. 3 quick taps, then silence. 3 more taps from a different direction, like Morse code, but in a language I couldn't understand. I told myself it was just the settling of rocks, thermal expansion and contraction causing the ancient stone to shift and crack. But the timing was too regular, too purposeful, and always those same 3 taps, never more, never less. As if something in the depths was trying to communicate. Sleep came fitfully that first night, filled with dreams of dark water and clicking sounds that followed me through endless underground passages. In the morning, I woke to find my windows covered in a thin film of moisture that looked almost oily in the early light. When I tried to wipe it away, my hand came back stained with something that looked disturbingly like the dried blood from the cairn stones. I spent an extra long time in the shower that morning, scrubbing my hands until they were raw, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had marked me during the night, something that now knew my scent, my location, my vulnerabilities. The gorge had accepted me, but not as a protector, as prey. At dusk, I walked the ridgeline with Jess Vargas, a rookie ranger on her 3rd week. She was eager and competent, the kind of ranger who'd studied every manual cover to cover and could recite wildlife behavior statistics from memory. 23 years old, fresh out of the academy, with the kind of confidence that comes from book learning rather than experience. I envied that confidence even as I worried about it. Black bears are generally non-aggressive unless protecting cubs or food sources, she rattled off, as we picked our way along the narrow trail that hugged the cliff edge. They're omnivorous, but prefer vegetation and insects. Human encounters are typically the result of improper food storage or... Her voice was steady, professional, the words flowing easily as she tried to convince herself as much as me that there was a rational explanation for everything we might encounter. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept darting to the dark spaces between the trees below us. The gorge had a way of getting under your skin, even if you were too inexperienced to understand why. We both stopped when the gorge went silent. It wasn't the natural quiet that sometimes settles over wilderness areas. This was something deeper, more complete. The cicadas that had been droning endlessly since late afternoon cut off mid-buzz. The owls that should have been starting their evening hunt choked back their hoots. Even the constant whisper of wind through the canyon went still, as if the very air had stopped moving. The silence stretched for 30 seconds, maybe a full minute. Long enough for us to exchange worried glances, long enough for Jess to reach unconsciously for the radio on her belt. Then, from somewhere down in the trees, came a hollow clicking sound. 3 quick taps, just like I'd heard the night before, like somebody knocking rock on rock, but with a hollow metallic quality that made my teeth ache. "Woodpecker," Jess whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Woodpeckers don't hunt at night," I replied, though I kept my own voice just as low. Something about the silence demanded whispers. The clicking came again, this time from a different location, maybe 50 yards to the north. Then again from the south, as if whatever was making the sound was circling us in the darkness below. The pattern was always the same. 3 sharp taps, then silence. But the spacing between the sequences was irregular, sometimes 5 seconds, sometimes 20, as if the thing making the sound was listening for responses. We kept moving, but I could feel Jess tensing beside me with every sound. Her textbook knowledge of wildlife behavior didn't include this kind of territorial marking, this deliberate stalking pattern that spoke to an intelligence far beyond what any known animal possessed. When we reached the end of the ridge trail, she was practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Should we investigate?" she asked, though I could tell from her tone that she hoped I'd say no. "Not in the dark," I replied. "We'll come back in the morning with backup." But morning brought something far worse than mysterious sounds in the darkness. We found the first body next morning, half submerged in Devil's Creek, a side stream that fed into the New River about 2 miles upstream from the main camping area. The water here was usually crystal clear, fed by underground springs that bubbled up through limestone beds. Now it ran rust red, and the metallic smell I'd noticed at the cairn hung heavy in the humid air. The victim's climbing harness and rope remained intact, still secured to the rock face above the creek. The gear was expensive, professional-grade equipment that showed signs of regular use and careful maintenance. But everything from the collarbones up was gone, sheared away so cleanly that for a moment my brain refused to process what I was seeing. There was no ragged tearing, no scavenger marks, no indication that animals had been feeding. Just a clean, wet cut as if some massive blade, a shovel scoop wide, had taken the head and shoulders in one precise pass. I pulled her ID from the dry bag still clipped to her harness. Emily Nagel, 26, biology graduate student from the University of West Virginia. According to her permits, she'd been studying amphibian populations in the area for her thesis research. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd come here to study the creatures that lived between land and water, and something that belonged to neither world had killed her. My stomach twisted as I photographed the scene, trying to maintain professional objectivity while fighting down the urge to vomit. In 23 years of law enforcement and park service work, I'd seen plenty of death. Car accidents, heart attacks, the occasional climbing fall or drowning. But this was different. This was deliberate, surgical in its precision, and the way the wound had been sealed, with no blood trail leading away from the body, suggested that whatever had done this had consumed what it had taken. The state police took custody of the remains, but Captain Douglas pulled me aside before they loaded the body bag into the ambulance. He was a 20-year veteran with kind eyes and premature gray hair, The kind of cop who'd seen everything and rarely let it show on his face. But standing there beside Devil's Creek, watching the red-stained water gurgle past our feet, he looked genuinely disturbed. "Off the record, McCleary," he said quietly. "That cut looks mechanical, like something with an edge. Equipment, maybe. Propeller blade." I nodded, though we both knew there was no equipment in these woods that could have made such a cut. No boats on the shallow creek, no machinery of any kind for miles. "What's your official theory?" "Officially? Animal attack. Bear, probably. Scavengers cleaned up afterward." He paused, studying my face. "But rivers don't hide propeller blades at their sources, and bears don't make cuts that clean." The captain was right about one thing. Emily had died upstream of any current strong enough to turn mechanical equipment. The creek at this point was barely knee-deep, fed by springs that bubbled up through beds of moss-covered limestone. The water moved lazily toward the main river, carrying nothing more dangerous than fallen leaves and the occasional crayfish. I hiked back toward the main trail, feeling deeply uneasy, checking my radio every few minutes and keeping one hand near the service pistol that suddenly felt inadequate for whatever we were dealing with. The forest around Devil's Creek felt different now, charged with a malevolent energy that made every shadow seem to move with purpose. Birds called in the distance, but their songs sounded strained, almost panicked. That night, Jess and I camped on the ridge, unwilling to retreat to the safety of our respective trailers. Something about Emily's death had convinced us both that isolation was the enemy now, that whatever was hunting in these woods preferred solitary targets. We pitched our tents back to back and built a fire larger than regulations technically allowed, feeding it constantly to keep the circle of light as wide as possible. Around 11 p.m., the clicking returned. Closer now, maybe 30 yards from our campsite, circling in the darkness beyond the firelight like a predator testing our defenses. The sound was clearer now, and I realized it wasn't rock on rock after all. It was more organic, like bones snapping together inside something's throat. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost musical, but wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. Jess shined her powerful LED flashlight in the direction of the sounds, sweeping the beam back and forth across the trees. The light caught nothing but moving fog and the gleaming eyes of small creatures. Raccoons, probably, or opossums, fleeing whatever was making the clicking sounds. But there were too many eyes, reflecting the light from too many directions, as if every creature in the forest was running from the same thing we couldn't see. We sat back to back until dawn, taking turns keeping watch while the other dozed fitfully. The clicking continued intermittently through the night, always moving, always staying just outside our circle of light. Sometimes it seemed to come from the trees above us, as if something was moving through the canopy with impossible grace. Other times it echoed up from the ground itself, as if the thing was traveling through underground passages we couldn't see. When the sun finally rose, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and red, the forest sounds gradually returned to normal. But I knew we'd crossed a line during the night. Whatever was out there had been studying us, learning our habits and vulnerabilities, and now it knew we were afraid. Day 3 brought a horror that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Jess didn't show at shift start, which wasn't like her. She was the kind of ranger who showed up 15 minutes early and had her equipment ready before the briefing began. When she didn't answer her radio, I hiked to her campsite expecting to find her sick or dealing with equipment problems. What I found was worse than anything I could have imagined. Her tent lay collapsed, the orange fabric twisted and torn as if something massive had fallen on it from above. The lightweight aluminum poles were snapped inward, bent at impossible angles that spoke to tremendous downward pressure. But there were no footprints around the site, no signs of a struggle, nothing to indicate what kind of force could have flattened a properly staked tent without leaving some trace of its passage. The zipper door hung open, shredded fabric flapping in the morning breeze. Inside, Jess's sleeping bag was empty, still zipped, but stained with something dark that I hoped was mud, but feared was blood. Her gear was scattered, water bottles crushed, first aid kit torn open, emergency radio smashed into electronic fragments. Whatever had taken her had been thorough, almost methodical in its destruction. But it was the hemlock tree 15 feet from the tent that made my blood run cold. Deep gouges scored the bark in parallel lines, each cut 6 inches long and curved slightly inward like massive claw marks. But the spacing was wrong for any bear or mountain lion. Too wide, too deep, and positioned too high on the trunk. The lowest mark started 12 feet up, as if something had been hanging from the tree and clawing at the bark in frustration or rage. I called search and rescue immediately, coordinating the response from Jess's destroyed campsite while trying not to contaminate any potential evidence. Within 2 hours, we had dogs and drones in the air, thermal imaging cameras sweeping the forest, and a full team of searchers combing every square yard of terrain. But the dogs acted strangely, whining and pulling away from certain areas as if they'd encountered a scent that triggered their deepest evolutionary fears. The drone pilots reported equipment malfunctions, compasses spinning wildly, GPS signals dropping out, camera feeds filled with static whenever they flew over certain sections of the forest. Robert, the lead pilot, was a 10-year veteran who'd flown military reconnaissance missions in Afghanistan. I'd never seen him look rattled by technical problems, but standing there watching his expensive drone crash into the canopy for no apparent reason, he looked genuinely spooked. "Something's interfering with the electronics," he said, studying the twisted wreckage we'd retrieved from a treetop. "But I've never seen interference patterns like this. It's almost like something was jamming the signals deliberately." I kept a foot search going while the technical teams tried to solve their equipment problems. Moving through the forest felt different now, heavier somehow, as if the air itself had thickened. The usual woodland sounds seemed muffled and distorted. Birds called from the wrong directions. Small animals moved with urgent purpose, all of them heading away from the search area as if fleeing some approaching disaster. The dogs lost Jess's scent at an abandoned percussion charge mine shaft above the Kaymore climbing ladders, a relic from the coal mining operations that had scarred this area in the early 1900s. The shaft entrance was partially collapsed, blocked by decades of fallen leaves and debris, but there was a gap large enough for a person to squeeze through. The opening exhaled a steady stream of cool air that tasted of copper pennies and something else. Something organic and unpleasant that made me want to breathe through my mouth. "I wouldn't go down there if I were you," said Walter, the SAR team leader. He'd been working search and rescue in the Appalachian region for over 30 years, and there was something in his weathered face that spoke of hard-won wisdom. Some of these old mines connect to cave systems that go on for miles, easy to get lost, easier to get dead, but Jess was down there somewhere, and she was my responsibility. Against Walter's advice and probably against my better judgment, I clipped on a safety line and squeezed through the narrow opening into the abandoned mine. Inside, the air tasted like copper pennies mixed with something fouler, the sweet, cloying scent of organic decay that seemed to coat the inside of my mouth. My headlamp beam cut through absolute darkness, revealing a low tunnel carved from black shale. Water trickled down the walls, leaving mineral stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood in the yellow light. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, gradually descending deeper into the earth. 10 yards in, I found Jess's radio on a flat shelf of rock, smashed so thoroughly that the plastic casing had been ground to powder. Beside it, someone had sketched a salamander in what looked like red chalk or dried blood. The drawing was crude but unmistakable. Wide head, external gills, legs splayed beneath a serpentine body. Underneath, in shaky capitals, someone had written, "It crawls, it climbs." The words sent ice water through my veins. This wasn't random vandalism or the work of local teenagers looking for thrills. This was a warning, left by someone who'd encountered whatever lived down here and survived long enough to share what they'd learned. The chalk, or blood, was fresh, applied within the last day or two, maybe by Jess herself, if she'd had time to understand what she was facing. I pushed deeper into the tunnel, following the steady trickle of water and the increasingly foul smell that seemed to rise from the depths. The passage narrowed, then opened into a cavern that my headlamp couldn't fully illuminate. The air here was warm and humid, like breathing inside the mouth of some massive creature. Water dripped constantly from stalactites overhead, each drop echoing through the darkness with hollow, ringing sounds. My beam struck something on the far wall that made me freeze in terror. Slick, gray-black skin stretched over layers of muscle, clinging to the vertical rock face like some impossible fusion of tree frog and nightmare. The thing was massive, as tall as me, but built with an amphibian's powerful limbs, each one bent backward to provide purchase on the stone. Its tail was twice the length of its body, thick with muscle and ending in a paddle-shaped appendage that looked designed for both swimming and striking. The head turned slowly toward my light, revealing eyes that were set too wide apart, lidless and reflective like a cat's butt with vertical pupils that contracted to slits in the beam of my headlamp. External gill slits frilled along what I assumed was a jawline, pulsing rhythmically as the thing breathed through both air and the moisture-saturated atmosphere of the cave. A thin dorsal ridge ran from the back of its skull to the tip of its tail, covered in what looked like sensory organs that twitched and moved independently. For a moment that felt like an eternity. We stared at each other across the cavern. The creature's head tilted slightly, studying me with an intelligence that was alien but unmistakably present. This wasn't some mindless predator driven by instinct. This was something that thought, planned, calculated. Something that had been watching the surface world and learning the habits of the creatures that lived there. Then it gave one slow click, two bones snapping together somewhere deep in its throat, and dropped from the wall with liquid grace. I leaped sideways as the creature landed exactly where I'd been standing, all four limbs splayed for balance while its massive tail whipped back and forth like a cat preparing to pounce. Up close, the smell was overwhelming. River mud mixed with hot copper and the sweet stench of partially digested meat. This close, I could see that its skin wasn't smooth like a typical amphibian's, but covered in tiny scales that shifted color in the light, providing natural camouflage against the cave walls. The mouth was the most horrifying feature, shovel-shaped and lined with rows of small conical teeth that were clearly optimized for holding rather than tearing. This wasn't built to kill quickly. It was designed to grab and swallow, to take its prey alive and whole. The thought of what Emily Nagel's final moments must have been like made my hands shake as I fumbled for my service weapon. I drew my sidearm and fired twice at center mass. Both rounds hit solidly, the reports deafeningly loud in the confined space of the cavern. The bullet struck the creature's hide and left dark dents but drew no blood. Its skin was apparently tough enough to stop small arms fire, or perhaps the rounds were simply absorbed by the thick layer of muscle beneath. The thing hissed, a sound like steam escaping from a radiator, and its tail lashed out, shattering rock beside my head. Razor-sharp shards of limestone peppered my face and arms as I turned and ran for the narrow tunnel entrance. Behind me, the clicking pursuit was faster now, like a broken metronome keeping time with my desperate flight. The sound echoed off the tunnel walls, seeming to come from all directions at once, as if multiple creatures were chasing me through the darkness. I sprinted through the tunnel, counting on the narrow space to slow whatever was behind me. But the clicking stayed close, sometimes seeming to come from above as if the thing was somehow moving through cracks in the ceiling I couldn't see. My headlamp beam bounced wildly as I ran, throwing monstrous shadows on the tunnel walls that could have been rocks, or could have been other creatures waiting to strike. I broke into daylight, gasping and stumbling, my lungs burning from the sprint and the foul air of the cave. The Sayar crew gathered around the shaft, mouth-barked warnings when they saw what was following me up the tunnel, a darkness that seemed to move independently of any visible form, accompanied by clicking sounds that echoed up from the depths like the ticking of some hellish clock. The creature halted at the threshold of the shaft entrance, just inside the zone where daylight penetrated the opening. Its pupils, which had been narrow slits in the darkness, shrank to pinpoints in the sun. For a moment, it seemed confused, almost blinded by the natural light. Then it retreated with one last defiant clack of its internal bones, disappearing back into the depths with a sound like rushing water. District Command immediately quarantined the shaft, setting up a perimeter that kept civilian hikers and climbers well away from the area. They called in state biologists, herpetologists, cryptozoologists, anyone with letters after their name who might be able to explain what we'd encountered. Most of them scoffed at my report, dismissing it as stress-induced hallucination or misidentification of known species. "Giant hellbenders don't climb vertical surfaces," said Dr. Michael Patterson, the state's leading expert on amphibian biology. "Nothing that size can survive outside a stable aquatic environment with carefully controlled temperature and pH levels. And what you're describing, these supposed claws, hellbenders don't have claws. They have soft, fleshy toes adapted for swimming." But Dr. Patterson hadn't seen the claw marks on the hemlock, hadn't stared into those alien eyes or felt the intelligence behind them. He hadn't heard the calculating, almost musical quality of the clicking sounds that seemed designed to lure prey into dark spaces where escape was impossible. I couldn't shrug off what I'd experienced. Jess was somewhere down in those tunnels, and whether she was alive or dead, I wasn't going to abandon her to whatever was lurking in the depths. I returned alone the next dawn, armed with a flare gun, waterproof matches, and a digital tape recorder. Against direct orders from District Command and probably against every survival instinct I possessed, I was going back into that hellish cavern to find Jess. The creature had her, and I was the only one who'd seen it and lived to tell about it. That made me either the best qualified person to attempt a rescue, or the biggest fool in the state park system. The equipment I carried was deliberately chosen for the confined spaces and the creature's apparent light sensitivity. The flare gun would provide intense illumination that might blind or disorient something adapted to absolute darkness. The waterproof matches were backup in case the primary light source failed. The tape recorder was running constantly, documenting everything I encountered for whatever investigation might follow my probable death. The mine shaft entrance looked different in the early morning light, smaller somehow, more menacing. The gap I'd squeezed through the day before seemed to have narrowed overnight, as if the earth itself was trying to seal the opening. Cool air still exhaled from the depths, but now it carried a different smell, more organic, more immediate. The metallic scent of blood mixed with something that reminded me disturbingly of a reptile house at a zoo. I clipped on fresh batteries for my headlamp, checked my safety line one final time, and squeezed through the opening into the abandoned mine. The tunnel felt different now, charged with a malevolent energy that made the hair on my arm stand up. Water still trickled down the black shale walls, but the mineral deposits looked more like dried blood than ever. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was being absorbed and redirected by the stone itself. At the shelf where I'd found Jess's destroyed radio, the salamander drawing had changed. New details had been added in what looked like fresh blood. Internal organs sketched with anatomical precision, reproductive structures that suggested whatever had drawn this understood the creature's biology far better than any surface-dwelling human should. The caption had been expanded too. "It crawls. It climbs. It breeds." That last word sent ice through my veins. If this thing was reproducing, if there were others like it in the network of caves beneath the gorge, then Jess might already be beyond any help I could provide. But I pressed on, following wet footprints that led deeper into the cavern system, toward the warm, humid darkness that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. The main cavern had changed too. My headlamp revealed pools of standing water I hadn't noticed before, fed by streams that seemed to flow upward from even deeper chambers. The water was the color of weak tea, stained by minerals and organic material that I didn't want to identify. Bioluminescent bacteria or fungi glowed faintly along the water's edge, providing just enough light to reveal movement beneath the surface, shapes too large and too purposeful to be fish. I followed the wet tracks around the edge of the largest pool, trying not to think about what might be watching me from the dark water. The prints were definitely human. Jess's hiking boots left distinctive tread marks in the mud, but they were accompanied by other impressions, long parallel grooves that could have been made by claws or webbed digits. Something had been walking beside her, or perhaps herding her toward some specific destination. The tracks led into a side passage I hadn't noticed during my first desperate flight from the creature. This tunnel was narrower but taller, carved by water action over millennia, into smooth, flowing shapes that resembled organic forms more than geological structures. The air grew warmer as I descended, heated by some source deep in the earth. Geothermal activity maybe, or simply the accumulated body heat of whatever was living down here. At the end of the passage, my headlamp revealed another pool, this one smaller but somehow more ominous than the others. The water was crystal clear, revealing a depth that my light couldn't penetrate. And there, on a natural ledge that jutted out over the water, lay Jess. She was unconscious but breathing, which was more than I'd dared hope for. But her lower leg was encased in a sticky, translucent film that looked disturbingly like frog spawn. The substance pulsed with its own rhythm, almost like a living thing, and where it contacted her skin, there were signs of chemical burns. Whatever this was, it wasn't just restraining her, it was slowly digesting her. I started toward the ledge, then froze as the water began to move. Something massive was rising from the depths, pushing aside gallons of liquid as it surfaced. The creature that emerged was the same one I'd encountered the day before, but now I could see it in its natural element. In the water, it moved with fluid grace, its powerful tail propelling it upward while its limbs stayed folded against its streamlined body. It placed itself deliberately between me and Jess, floating in the center of the pool with only its head and the ridge along its back visible above the surface. Its gill slits flared crimson, some kind of threat display that made the water around it shimmer with disturbed bioluminescence. Up close, I could see that its eyes weren't just reflective. They actually glowed with their own internal light, like the deep-sea creatures that never see the sun. Looking at this thing, remembering Emily's clean, severed remains, I finally understood what we were dealing with. This wasn't just some unknown amphibian species that had grown large in isolation. This was a specialized predator that had evolved in the flooded mine shafts, feeding on whatever fell or was dragged into its domain. It wanted the soft parts, brain tissue, organs, bone marrow, anything rich in calcium and phosphorus, nutrients that were scarce in the acid-washed environment of abandoned coal mines. The creature had been studying the surface world, learning the patterns of the creatures that lived there. It knew when climbers came down the approach trails. It knew where rangers camped and patrolled. It was smart enough to build warning markers, to lure prey into areas where escape was impossible, to keep them alive long enough for proper processing. I raised the flare gun, speaking as much to calm my own nerves as to communicate with the thing floating before me. Let her go. The creature's response was immediate and terrifying. It lunged forward with explosive power, propelling itself out of the water with its massive tail, while its limbs unfolded for the attack. I had perhaps half a second to react before those shovel-shaped jaws would close around my torso. I fired the flare gun directly into its face. The phosphorus charge exploded in a burst of white-hot light that turned the cavern into a temporary star. The creature shrieked, a sound like a boiling tea kettle mixed with the grinding of metal against stone. It thrashed wildly in the superheated air, its sensitive eyes apparently seared by the intensity of the flare. The chemical fire spread to the walls of the cavern, igniting deposits of organic material that had accumulated over decades. Rock overhead, heated beyond its structural limits, began to crack and splinter. A massive slab broke free and crashed down onto the creature's tail, pinning it against the bottom of the pool. Water rushed in from somewhere deeper in the cave system, carrying debris and stirring up sediment that had lain undisturbed for decades. I didn't wait to see if the creature would free itself. I grabbed Jess, slung her across my shoulders in a fireman's carry, and ran as the ceiling continued to collapse behind us. The gelatinous substance around her leg dissolved in the heat of the flare's aftermath, releasing a smell that made me gag even as I ran. Behind us, I could hear the creature's agonized cries mixing with the rumble of falling stone and rushing water. The trip back through the tunnel was a nightmare of noise and terror, my headlamp beam dancing wildly as I stumbled through the darkness with Jess's unconscious weight across my shoulders. At any moment I expected to feel claws raking down my back or jaws closing around my legs. But either the creature was too injured to pursue, or the collapsing tunnel had sealed it off in the depths where it belonged. I emerged from the mine shaft to find a medical helicopter already warming up on the plateau above. Someone, probably Walter, the SAR team leader, had called for immediate evacuation as soon as they'd seen me enter the tunnel. The paramedics took Jess from my arms and loaded her into the aircraft with practiced efficiency, starting IV lines and monitoring equipment even as the helicopter lifted off toward the regional medical center. I turned to find Frank, my supervisor, standing beside me with an expression I couldn't read. Relief that we'd recovered Jess alive, maybe, mixed with something else. Something that looked almost like resignation. "We knew something was in those tunnels," he said quietly, watching the helicopter disappear over the canyon rim. First report was back in 1975. 2 miners disappeared during the final cleanup operations. Company blamed methane gas, sealed the shafts, and walked away. We've been keeping people out ever since. Seemed like the cheapest solution. I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. "You knew? You knew there was something down there and you didn't warn us?" Frank looked older than his 58 years, worn down by decades of keeping dangerous secrets. "The gorge lives on tourism, McCleary. Hard to sell rafting trips and rock climbing when there's a 6-foot amphibian hunting the cliffs. We thought we had it contained." I thought of Emily Nagel, her headless body floating in Devil's Creek. I thought of Jess, slowly being digested alive on that stone ledge. Contained wasn't the word I would have used. I filed my report anyway, documenting every detail of what I'd encountered in the abandoned mine. 2 weeks later, state geologists dynamited the shaft entrance, claiming unstable roof conditions made the area too dangerous for public access. The official statements mentioned structural concerns and environmental hazards but made no reference to cryptids or unknown species. The blast brought down several thousand tons of limestone and coal shale, sealing the entrance so thoroughly that nothing short of industrial mining equipment would ever reopen it. But I wasn't naive enough to believe that one explosion could seal off an entire cave system. Water finds a way, and so do the things that live in the dark spaces beneath the earth. Jess survived, though she lost her lower leg below the knee to whatever chemicals had been in that gelatinous cocoon. The doctors said she was lucky. Whatever had been dissolving her tissue had also prevented infection, creating a sterile environment that aided healing once the substance was neutralized. She was fitted with a prosthetic and eventually returned to active duty, though she requested a transfer to a park system in the desert southwest. Somewhere without caves, without abandoned mines, without dark water flowing through underground passages. The superintendent's explanation was clinical and bureaucratic, delivered in the same tone he might use to discuss budget allocations or maintenance schedules. But there was something in his eyes that suggested he'd been carrying this burden for longer than he cared to remember. "The mining operations here ended in 1918, he said, spreading geological survey maps across his desk. But some of the deepest shafts were never properly sealed. When they flooded the galleries to control the methane fires, they created an entire ecosystem that was cut off from the surface world for decades. Things evolved down there, adapted to an environment that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth." I studied the maps, trying to understand the full scope of what we were dealing with. The network of tunnels and natural caverns extended for miles beneath the gorge, connecting with underground rivers and limestone caves that had never been fully explored. What we'd encountered was probably just one individual from a population that might number in the dozens or hundreds. "So we just ignore it?" I asked. "Pretend it doesn't exist and hope it stays underground?" The superintendent closed the maps and locked them back in his filing cabinet. "We contain it as best we can. Keep people away from the known access points. Monitor the area for any unusual activity, and hope that evolution continues to favor creatures that prefer the depths to the surface." But evolution isn't always so cooperative. Every spring since 2013, paddlers on the New River have reported strange encounters. Long shadows that keep pace with their rafts, moving beneath the dark water with purpose and intelligence. Shapes that vanish when the sun breaks through the morning mist, but leave wakes too large and too organized to be fish or debris. The sightings follow a pattern that makes my blood run cold. They cluster around the areas where underground streams connect to the main river, places where deep currents could carry things up from the flooded mine shafts. The descriptions are always similar. Something large and serpentine, moving against the current with powerful rhythmic strokes. Something that watches rafts and kayaks from below, studying the surface dwellers with an intelligence that speaks of long-term planning. I left the Park Service that winter, unable to continue working in a system that prioritized public relations over public safety. But leaving the gorge didn't free me from its influence. The dreams followed me to my new home in Virginia, dreams of dark water and clicking sounds that echo through endless underground passages. Sometimes I wake to find my windows covered with that same oily moisture I'd noticed after my first encounter with the cairn, and I wonder if something has been marking me all these years. The archives tell a story that makes perfect sense once you understand what you're looking for. In 1915, a methane explosion in the Kmore mine sealed off an entire section of tunnels, trapping 73 workers in the lower galleries. The rescue efforts were hampered by continued fires and toxic gas, so they flooded the affected areas with river water, drowning the flames but also drowning any miners who might have survived the initial blast. The survivors, if there were any, spoke of strange lights in the smoke-filled tunnels, of sounds that weren't quite human echoing through the darkness. They described encounters with creatures that shouldn't have existed, things that had been changed by the toxic environment and the trauma of being buried alive. The rescue teams dismissed these accounts as hallucinations brought on by gas poisoning and extreme stress. But coal seams in that geological layer are rich in heavy metals and radioactive isotopes, creating conditions that could accelerate evolutionary processes in ways that surface environments never could. A population of eastern hellbenders, trapped in the flooded galleries and cut off from their natural habitat, might indeed grow to enormous size. They might develop new hunting strategies, new sensory capabilities, new levels of intelligence driven by the need to survive in an artificial ecosystem. By the time erosion and mining subsidence reopened connections to the surface, half a century later, only the strongest and most adaptable individuals would have survived. The female I encountered was probably the last of her generation, driven to the surface by receding groundwater levels and the need to find calcium-rich prey for egg production. She'd learned to hunt mammals because they provided nutrients faster and more efficiently than the blind crayfish and cave fish that had sustained her ancestors. We dynamited the most obvious entrance, but water always finds a way through limestone, and so do the things that live in the dark spaces between the rocks. The network of caves and abandoned mine shafts extends for hundreds of miles through the Appalachian region, connecting water systems that flow beneath multiple states. What we encountered in the New River Gorge was probably just the tip of a much larger iceberg. On nights when rain beats against my windows, I still hear the clicking. Two stones tapping together in the darkness, marking territory that extends far beyond what any map can show. The sound carries on the wind, following underground rivers that connect distant regions in ways that surface geography can't reveal. Sometimes I wonder if that female did lay her eggs before we sealed her tomb, and if somewhere in the flooded depths, a new generation is learning to hunt the surface world. The gorge is wide, and its secrets run deep. We like to think we've conquered the wilderness, mapped every square mile and cataloged every species. But there are still places where ancient things survive, adapted to environments we've forgotten how to see. Places where the line between evolution and nightmare becomes impossible to distinguish. I keep a loaded flare gun beside my bed now, and I never go camping near bodies of water that connect to cave systems. Because I know that somewhere in the dark spaces beneath the earth, something is still clicking its hollow song, still marking territory, still waiting for the right combination of circumstances to bring it back to the surface. The New River Gorge is a beautiful place, full of recreational opportunities and natural wonders that attract visitors from around the world. The Park Service does an excellent job of maintaining the trails, managing the climbing areas, and keeping the public safe from known hazards. But there are some dangers that don't appear on any trail map, some risks that can't be mitigated by warning signs or safety equipment. The water is wide, and the darkness beneath it is older than human civilization. In that darkness, things have been growing and changing and learning, waiting for their time to return to the surface world. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the river runs high and the mist rises from the canyon, I think that time might be coming sooner than we'd like to believe. The archives are public record, available to anyone willing to dig through decades of mining reports and geological surveys. The evidence is there for anyone who wants to see it, hidden in plain sight among the bureaucratic language of government documentation. But most people prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths, especially when those truths suggest that we share this world with things that see us as nothing more than a convenient source of calcium and protein. I write this account not as a warning. Warnings imply that preparation is possible, that danger can be avoided through proper precautions. This is simply a record of what happened, what continues to happen, and what will probably happen again when conditions are right. The Earth is old, and life is persistent, and evolution doesn't always produce results that fit comfortably within our understanding of the natural world. The gorge keeps its secrets, but sometimes those secrets find their way to the surface. And when they do, all our maps and guidebooks and safety protocols become as useless as prayers whispered in the dark. As a park ranger, I learned that when hikers report seeing a ranger who looks exactly like you patrolling areas where you've never been, it's time to request a transfer. My name is Mason Calloway, and I've been a ranger at the Kettle Moraine State Forest in Wisconsin for 7 years. I love these woods, the ancient glacial formations, the dense pine stands, the hidden lakes that appear like mirrors when the morning mist rises. But lately, something has changed in my forest, something that makes the hair on my neck stand up when I'm alone on patrol. It started 3 weeks ago when a family of hikers approached my station near the south entrance. The father, a burly man with a thick beard and curious eyes, asked if I'd resolved the issue with the fallen tree on Eagle Trail. "What fallen tree?" I asked. "The man's brow furrowed, the one you were clearing yesterday afternoon. You were using a chainsaw about 2 miles in." I hadn't been on Eagle Trail yesterday. I'd been handling paperwork at the main office all day. "Must have been Sean or Nathan," I said, referring to my colleagues. "I wasn't out there yesterday." The man's wife stepped forward, her expression troubled. "No, it was definitely you. We chatted for a minute about the woodpeckers. You even showed our kids the marking on your badge, the little scratch that looks like a lightning bolt." My hand unconsciously moved to my badge, tracing the distinctive scratch I'd gotten during a rescue operation last spring. A cold sensation spread through my chest. "Are you feeling okay, Ranger Mason?" the woman asked, noticing my expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "Just tired. Thanks for letting me know about the tree." After they left, I radioed Sean and Nathan. Neither had been anywhere near Eagle Trail yesterday. That night I couldn't sleep. The thought of someone impersonating me, wearing what must be a perfect replica of my uniform complete with a scratched badge, was deeply unsettling. Park ranger impersonation wasn't unheard of. There had been cases of people using fake uniforms to rob campers or worse. But this level of detail, it felt personal. The next morning, I drove to Eagle Trail at dawn. The forest was still and quiet, wrapped in that special silence that comes before the world fully wakes. The fallen tree was there, just as the hikers had described, freshly cut with a chainsaw, the sawdust still bright orange against the dark soil. As I examined the clean-cut trunk, a twig snapped behind me. I spun around, hand instinctively moving to my sidearm. Nothing, just the endless rows of pines and oaks, their shadows long in the early morning light. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded thin in the vast forest. No response, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest had never felt threatening before, but now the shadows between the trees seemed deeper, more concealing. I decided to hike deeper into the trail, following where the tree cutter might have gone. About half a mile in, I found the first print. At first I thought it was a bear track. We have black bears in the area, though they're generally shy and avoid humans. But this print was different, larger than any bear I'd seen, with 5 distinct toe impressions. The stride length between prints was enormous, easily 7 feet. My radio crackled, making me jump. "Mason, you there?" It was Sean. "Yeah, go ahead," I replied, my eyes still fixed on the strange print. "We've got another report of you helping hikers on Moraine Ridge. Couple says you gave them directions about an hour ago." I checked my watch. An hour ago I'd been in my truck, driving to Eagle Trail. "That's impossible," I said, my mouth dry. "That's what I thought," Sean replied, "but they described you perfectly. Even mentioned that scar on your left hand from when you fell off the fire tower. My gaze dropped to the thin white scar that ran across my left palm. Very few people knew how I'd gotten it. Sean, something weird is going on. I'm on Eagle Trail, and I've found some strange tracks. I think we should... A loud crash interrupted me, coming from deeper in the forest. It sounded like a tree falling or something massive moving through the underbrush. Mason, you okay? Sean's voice seemed distant now. I need to check something out. I'll call you back. I clipped the radio to my belt and moved toward the sound, my steps careful and measured. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my breathing and the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots. The tracks continued, leading me off trail into a dense stand of pines I'd never fully explored. The canopy overhead grew thicker, casting the forest floor in premature twilight. The air felt colder here, damper somehow. Then I saw it, a flash of green, through the trees. The same shade of green as my ranger uniform. Hey, I called out, breaking into a run. Stop right there. I pursued the figure through the trees, catching glimpses of movement, a shoulder here, the back of a head there. The person was fast, inhumanly so, weaving through the dense forest with the ease of something born to it. Suddenly, I broke into a small clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. The clearing was empty, but at its center stood a crude structure, a teepee-like arrangement of massive branches and logs that no human could have lifted without machinery. Around the structure, the ground was littered with things, a broken compass that looked like mine, a water bottle with my station's logo, a tattered piece of fabric that matched my uniform. As I approached the structure, a powerful stench hit me, a mixture of wet fur, decay, and something musky and animal. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. From behind me came a low rumbling sound, not quite a growl, not quite human. I turned slowly, my hand on my sidearm. Nothing was there but the trees at the edge of the clearing swayed slightly, as if something large had just passed. My radio crackled again, making me flinch. Mason, it was Nathan this time. We've got another report. Someone matching your description just escorted a lost child back to the visitor center. I stared at the radio in disbelief. Nathan, that's impossible. I'm miles from the visitor center. There was a pause. Then Nathan spoke, his voice tight with confusion. Mason, I'm looking at you right now. You're standing at the front desk, filling out the incident report. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I looked around the empty clearing, at the strange structure with my possessions, at the massive footprints leading away into the darkening forest. That's not me, Nathan, I whispered. Whatever's there, it's not me. The drive back to headquarters was the longest 20 minutes of my life. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and every shadow on the forest road made my heart skip. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the sun was setting, casting long fingers of darkness between the trees. The visitor center was quiet when I entered. Nathan stood behind the counter, his expression confused and concerned. You just left, he said as I approached, like 2 minutes ago. How did you? It wasn't me, I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended. Where did it go? Nathan pointed toward the back exit. Said you were going to check the south perimeter before ending your shift. Mason, what the hell is going on? I didn't answer. Instead, I moved to the security monitor and rewound the footage. There I was, or something, wearing my face, escorting a small boy to the front desk, smiling and chatting with Nathan, then exiting through the back door. The resemblance was uncanny, down to the way I walked. But as I studied the footage more closely, I noticed subtle differences. The thing's movements were too fluid, too precise, and its eyes, they never seemed to blink. We need to talk, I said to Nathan. Get Sean on the radio. Meet me in the conference room in 5 minutes. As Nathan made the call, I went to my locker and retrieved something I rarely used, a personal firearm, a Glock 20 chambered in 10mm. Wisconsin forests occasionally have predators that warrant serious protection, and right now I felt like I needed every advantage I could get. In the conference room, I laid out everything. The hiker reports, the tracks I'd found, the strange structure in the clearing, and the security footage. Sean and Nathan listened in stunned silence. You think someone's impersonating you? Sean finally asked. That's a federal offense. We should call in the authorities. I shook my head. You saw the footage. That thing looks exactly like me. And those tracks, they weren't human, Sean. What are you suggesting? Nathan leaned forward, his expression skeptical but attentive. I hesitated. What I was thinking sounded insane, even to me. But the evidence was mounting, and my ranger instincts honed by years in the forest were screaming that something supernatural was happening. Have either of you heard of the Beast of Bray Road? I asked. They exchanged glances. The werewolf thing? Sean snorted. That's just local legend, Mason. Tourist trap stuff. Maybe, I conceded. But Bray Road isn't far from here, and the legends about shapeshifters and forest creatures go back centuries in this region. The Potawatomi believed in spirits that could take human form. You think a werewolf is pretending to be you? Nathan's voice was incredulous. Not a werewolf exactly, I said. Something else. Something that can mimic human appearance but moves differently in the woods. Something that's been collecting my things, learning my behaviors. I pulled out my phone and showed them photos I'd taken of the tracks. These aren't bear or wolf prints. They're too big, the stride too long. Sean studied the images, his skepticism visibly wavering. Okay, so what then? Bigfoot. The word hung in the air. I deliberately avoided saying it because it sounded ridiculous. The stuff of cheap tabloids and late-night conspiracy shows. But the more I thought about it, the more it aligned with what I'd seen. The Potawatomi called them Manitowapovi forest spirits that could mimic humans, I said. Modern sightings call them Sasquatch or Bigfoot. Different names for maybe the same thing. This is crazy, Nathan muttered, but he didn't sound convinced of his own dismissal. Whatever it is, I continued, it's fixated on me for some reason. And it's getting bolder, first appearing to hikers in remote areas, now coming right into our headquarters. What do we do? Sean asked. Can't exactly file a report about a shape-shifting Bigfoot. I thought for a moment. We need to catch it in the act. Set up trail cameras around the forest, especially near that structure I found. And we need to warn the other rangers without sounding like we've lost our minds. Tell them there's a convincing impersonator in the park who might be dangerous. As we discussed the details, a storm rolled in, thunder rumbling across the sky like distant drums. The rain came down in sheets, lashing against the windows of the conference room. I stared out at the darkness, at the wall of trees barely visible through the downpour. Somewhere out there, something was wearing my face, walking my trails, speaking with my voice, and I had no idea what it wanted. After the meeting, I couldn't face going home to my empty cabin on the edge of the forest. Instead, I decided to spend the night at headquarters, reviewing old files and local legends about the region. The ranger station kept archives of incident reports dating back decades, and I pulled everything I could find about unusual sightings, missing persons, and unexplained phenomena in the Kettle Moraine area. As the storm raged outside, I pored over yellowed papers and faded photographs. Most were easily explainable: lost hikers, weather phenomena, wildlife encounters. But a pattern emerged in reports from the 1970s, 1990s, and again around 2010. Clusters of strange events that occurred roughly every 20 years. Rangers reporting doppelgangers, hikers finding structures deep in the woods, unexplained noises that sent wildlife fleeing in terror, and always, massive footprints found near the sites of the incidents. One report from 1972 caught my attention. Ranger Ian Mercer had documented a series of encounters with what he described as a creature mimicking human appearance and behavior. The encounters escalated over several weeks until Mercer disappeared during a night patrol. His body was never found, but his badge turned up 6 months later in a remote part of the forest, bent and twisted as if crushed by enormous pressure. My blood ran cold as I read Mercer's final report, written the day before he vanished. I believe the entity is learning, adapting. Each mimicry becomes more perfect. It's studying us, studying me, for some purpose I cannot determine. Traditional weapons seem to cause it only momentary distress. I've taken to carrying silver based on local folklore, though I feel foolish doing so. If anything happens to me, look for the structure. Everything returns to the structure eventually. The structure. Just like the one I'd found. Outside, lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the parking lot, and there at the edge of the forest I caught a glimpse of a figure standing perfectly still in the downpour. A figure in a ranger uniform, its face hidden in shadow. I blinked, and it was gone. Sleep was impossible after that. I spent the rest of the night preparing, cleaning my firearm, gathering equipment, studying maps of the forest to pinpoint the location of the structure I'd found. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the forest glistening and renewed. But as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, they revealed something unsettling in the parking lot, a perfect outline of massive footprints, circling the building throughout the night, always staying just outside the pool of light cast by the security lamps. The last print led back toward the deep forest, toward the area where I'd found the structure. I knew then that I couldn't wait for help or for some elaborate trap. This thing, whatever it was fixated on me, and it was getting closer, more aggressive, more bold. It was time to confront it on its own territory. I left a detailed note for Sean and Nathan explaining where I was going and what I'd discovered in the archives. Then, armed with my sidearm, a silver knife I'd found in the historical display case, and a day's worth of supplies, I headed into the forest. The trail was easy to follow. Broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, and occasional massive footprints leading deeper into the oldest part of the forest, an area so dense and remote that even experienced rangers rarely ventured there. As I hiked, the forest changed subtly around me. The familiar trails and landmarks gave way to ancient gnarled trees I didn't recognize. The air grew colder, despite the summer heat, and hung heavy with mist that shouldn't have been there after the storm had cleared. It felt like I was walking into another world entirely, or perhaps the true world that had always existed beneath the thin veneer of the forest I thought I knew. After 3 hours of difficult hiking, I found myself back at the clearing with the structure. In daylight it was even more imposing, a massive teepee of logs and branches that stood at least 15 feet tall. Around its base I now could see symbols etched into the earth, spirals and jagged lines that reminded me of the petroglyphs in the historical museum. But what made my skin crawl were the new additions to the collection of items surrounding the structure. My notebook, which I'd left in my truck the previous day, a coffee mug from my cabin, a photo of me that had been on my desk. It had been to my home. While I was at the ranger station, it had been in my cabin, taking my things. As I stood there, the silence of the forest pressed in around me, that unnatural silence that comes when every living thing is hiding, afraid of a predator in their midst. "I know you're out there," I called, my voice steady despite the fear churning in my gut. "I know what you're doing. It ends now." The forest remained silent, but I could feel eyes on me, watching from somewhere among the ancient trees. "Show yourself," I demanded, drawing my firearm. "No more games, no more mimicry. Show me your true face." From deep within the forest came a sound that made my blood freeze, my own voice calling back to me. "Show myself? But you already know my face, Ranger Mason. It's the same as yours." I spun toward the voice, my Glock raised, finger hovering near the trigger. The forest seemed to warp around me, shadows stretching despite the midday sun overhead. Through the trees I caught glimpses of movement, something large, shifting position, circling the clearing. "What do you want?" I called out, struggling to keep my voice steady. A low rumbling chuckle answered, my voice but distorted as if pushed through a throat not designed for human speech. "Want to learn, to become, to replace." The words sent ice through my veins. Replace me? The implications were horrifying. This thing wasn't just mimicking me for some alien amusement. It wanted to take over my life. "Why me?" I demanded, turning slowly, trying to track the movement among the trees. "You watch, you listen, you know the forest." The voice was closer now, coming from behind a massive oak to my right. "I watch you watching. Learn from the learner." My mind raced. It made a twisted kind of sense. As a ranger, I observed the forest, studied its patterns, protected its boundaries. I was a guardian of knowledge about this place. Knowledge this creature apparently valued. "You've been watching me for how long?" I asked, trying to keep it talking while I edged toward a better defensive position. Silence, stretched for several seconds. Then many moons. Watched others before, the one called Ian, the one called Logan, now you. Ian Mercer, the ranger who disappeared in the 70s. And Logan must have been Logan Braithwaite, a ranger who went missing in the 90s, whose case I'd read about in the archives. Both had reported doppelgangers before they vanished. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the pattern. Every 20 years or so, this thing selected a new ranger to study, to mimic, and eventually to, what? Kill, replace. The reports never said what happened to the missing rangers, only that they were never found. "Those rangers," I said. "What did you do to them?" Another chuckle, closer now. "They became part of the forest, as you will." The brush to my left rustled. I fired a warning shot into the air, the report echoing through the trees. "Stay back," I shouted. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." For a moment the forest fell completely silent, then the voice came again, this time from directly behind me. "Hurt me? With your small metal stinger?" Others tried. "The metal passes through, like through mist. I am not solid, as you understand." I whirled around, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. It wore my face, my uniform, but the resemblance was only surface deep. Its proportions were wrong, arms too long, shoulders too broad, and its eyes, God, its eyes were black pools, reflecting nothing. As I watched in horror, its form seemed to ripple, like heat waves over asphalt. My features melted away, revealing glimpses of something ancient and terrible beneath. Matted fur, massive muscles, a face that was neither human nor animal, but something in between. I fired 3 shots instinctively. The bullets struck it in the chest, but instead of blood they kicked up puffs of what looked like dark smoke. The creature staggered back a step, more in surprise than pain, then straightened. "See," it said, its voice deepening, losing its human quality. "Not like you, not prey." I backed away, my mind racing. Not solid. The bullets passed through it like smoke. What was this thing? Not flesh and blood as I understood it, but something else. Something that could shift between solid and intangible at will. The silver knife at my belt suddenly seemed more logical, not because of werewolf lore but because silver had properties different from other metals: conductive, reflective, symbolic. As the creature advanced, I drew the knife with my left hand, keeping the Glock trained with my right. "Stay back," I warned again. The thing that wore my face tilted its head, studying the silver blade with what looked like genuine curiosity. "The shining metal," it rumbled. "The one called Ian had this too." It disturbed me, but did not save him. "What are you?" I demanded, still backing toward the edge of the clearing. "Not Bigfoot. Not a werewolf. What?" The creature seemed to consider the question, its form still rippling between my appearance and something monstrous. "Older than your words," it finally said. "Older than your kind in these forests. We were here when the ice mountains melted. We watched your kind crawl from caves. We learned to hide as you spread." "Shapeshifters," I whispered. "We wear what we need to wear," it corrected. "Take what we need to take. Your kind fears what it cannot understand, so we become what you understand, until we don't need to anymore." As it spoke, its mimicry of my form stabilized, becoming more perfect. If I hadn't known what lurked beneath, I would have thought I was looking at my own twin. "And now you don't need my form anymore?" I asked, trying to keep it talking while I formulated a plan. The structure, the massive teepee-like arrangement, seemed important. Both Ian and Logan had mentioned structures in their reports. The creature's mouth. My mouth stretched into an unnatural smile. "Soon, when I have learned enough, when I can walk among your kind without detection, when I can replace you so completely that even those closest to you won't know the difference." A horrible thought struck me. "The others you've mimicked, are they still alive somewhere?" The creature's smile widened. "Parts of them, their knowledge, their memories, absorbed, preserved, they serve a purpose still." My back hit the trunk of a massive pine. I could retreat no further. The creature, my doppelganger, approached with unnatural grace, its movements too fluid, too precise. "It won't hurt," it said, almost gently. "Becoming one with us. Your knowledge will help us survive. Your memories will join the collective. A kind of immortality. Ranger Mason." As it reached for me, I made my move. Instead of retreating further, I lunged forward, slashing with the silver knife. The blade connected with its arm, and this time there was resistance and a reaction. The creature hissed, recoiling as the silver left a smoking gash in its flesh. The wound oozed not blood but a thick, dark substance like tar. I pressed my advantage, slashing again, driving it back toward the structure in the center of the clearing. The creature snarled, its mimicry slipping, my features dissolving to reveal glimpses of something ancient and terrible. A face with proportions all wrong, eyes too large, jaw too pronounced. "The shining metal burns," it growled, its voice no longer human, "but will not save you." It lunged with inhuman speed, knocking the knife from my hand. I fired the Glock again, emptying the magazine into its chest. The bullets passed through, leaving only swirls of dark smoke, but the impact still staggered it momentarily. I dove for the knife, rolling and coming up with the silver blade just as the creature recovered. We circled each other in the clearing, the massive structure looming over us like a primitive temple. "What is this place?" I demanded, nodding toward the structure. "What happens here?" The creature's eyes, now completely black with no whites visible, flicked toward the structure and back to me. "A doorway," it said simply, "between your world and ours, where the veil is thin. A portal." Of course. That explained the unnatural cold around the structure. The strange symbols etched into the ground. The collection of items that seemed like offerings or talismans. "And the things you've taken from me?" I asked. "My possessions?" "Anchors," it replied. "Connections. To make the mimicry stronger. To learn your essence." I glanced at the collection of my belongings surrounding the base of the structure. My notebook, coffee mug, photo, badge replica. Personal items, things imbued with my identity. In folklore, such items often had power, hair, fingernails, personal effects, things that could be used in sympathetic magic. An idea formed, desperate but possible. If these items strengthened its connection to me, its ability to mimic me, I lunged suddenly, not at the creature but at the structure, slashing at the branches with the silver knife. The wood splintered with surprising ease, as if the silver blade held special power against it. At the same time, I kicked at my collected possessions, scattering them. The creature howled, a sound like no animal I'd ever heard, a multi-tone shriek that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. It rushed toward me, its form fully shifting now, abandoning any pretense of humanity. What I saw in those moments would haunt me forever. A massive body covered in dark, matted fur, limbs too long and jointed wrong, a face that seemed to shift between ape, wolf, and something wholly alien. It moved with impossible speed, covering the distance between us in a heartbeat. But I was ready. As it reached for me with elongated fingers tipped with wicked claws, I thrust the silver knife directly at its chest. The blade sank into the hilt, and the creature's momentum carried it forward, impaling itself further. A sound like thunder rolled through the clearing. The creature thrashed, black ichor pouring from the wound, its form rippling and shifting rapidly between shapes. My face, the monstrous form, and dozens of others, some human, some not. Faces I didn't recognize. Were these its previous victims? Ian Mercer? Logan Braithwaite? Others? The structure behind us began to shake, the massive logs vibrating as if in an earthquake. The symbols etched in the ground glowed with an eerie blue light, and the air turned frigid. The creature clutched at the knife in its chest, trying to remove it, but the silver seemed to burn its hands on contact. It fixed me with those bottomless black eyes, and for a moment I saw something almost like respect in them. Clever prey, it rumbled, its voice now a chorus of different tones and timbres. But the doorway remains. Others will come. Others always come. With a tremendous effort, it ripped the knife from its chest, black ichor spraying in an arc. Instead of attacking me again, it staggered toward the structure, each step leaving a smoking footprint in the earth. I should have run. Everything in me screamed to flee, to get as far from this nightmare as possible. But I couldn't leave. Not with the knowledge that this doorway would remain, that others would come. I searched frantically for a way to destroy the structure, to close whatever portal existed here. Fire. The wooden structure would burn, but would that be enough? As I hesitated, the creature reached the structure and placed a clawed hand on one of the main support logs. The entire construction began to glow with the same eerie blue light as the symbols on the ground. The cycle continues, the creature intoned. We adapt, we survive, we return. With a final surge of desperate courage, I rushed forward, snatching up the silver knife from where the creature had dropped it. As the blue light intensified, I slashed at the support logs of the structure, putting all my strength behind each blow. The creature roared and swiped at me with claws that could have disemboweled me with a single strike. I ducked and rolled, coming up behind it, and drove the silver knife into the base of its spine. This time, the reaction was immediate and catastrophic. The creature convulsed, its form shifting rapidly between shapes, its roar becoming a cacophony of voices, some human, some animal, some utterly alien. The structure's glow intensified to a blinding brilliance, the blue light pulsing like a heartbeat. I backed away, shielding my eyes, as the light became unbearable. The air crackled with energy, and the ground beneath my feet trembled. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing, the structure collapsed inward, taking the thrashing creature with it. The blue light imploded, condensing to a single point before flashing outward in a shockwave that knocked me off my feet. And then silence, complete and absolute. When I dared to look up, the clearing was empty. No structure, no creature, no scattered possessions. Even the symbols etched in the ground had vanished, leaving only undisturbed forest floor. Only the silver knife remained, lying innocuously on the ground where the center of the structure had been. As I picked it up with trembling hands, I noticed something etched on the blade that hadn't been there before, symbols similar to those that had surrounded the structure, flowing along the metal like liquid. I had no idea what they meant, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: this wasn't over. The creature had said it itself. The cycle continues. I might have won this encounter, but the war was just beginning. The hike back to headquarters took twice as long as the journey in. Every shadow made me flinch, every rustle of leaves sent my hand to the silver knife at my belt. The forest that had been my sanctuary for 7 years now felt like hostile territory. When I finally emerged from the tree line, the ranger station was a hive of activity. 3 police cruisers were parked outside, their lights flashing silently. Small crowd of rangers and local police officers stood in the parking lot, surrounding Sean and Nathan. They spotted me immediately, relief washing over their faces. "Mason," Sean jogged toward me. "Where the hell have you been? We've been searching since dawn." Before I could answer, Nathan joined us, followed by a stern-looking police officer whose badge identified him as Sheriff Owen Blackwood of Walworth County. "Ranger Calloway," the sheriff said, his voice clipped. "Care to explain why you left your post without authorization and why you took a historical artifact from the display case?" I glanced down at the silver knife, still clutched in my hand. How could I possibly explain what had happened? That I'd fought a shape-shifting entity in the woods? That I'd destroyed some kind of interdimensional portal? I'd sound insane. It's complicated, Sheriff, I managed. I was investigating the reports of someone impersonating me in the park. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Yes, your colleagues mentioned that. They also mentioned some
unusual theories you've been developing.
I shot a look at Sean and Nathan. Sean had the grace to look embarrassed. We had to tell them everything, Mason, he said quietly. After you disappeared and we found your note, we were worried. I sighed. Of course they had to report it. If our roles had been reversed, I would have done the same. Let's continue this inside, Sheriff Blackwood suggested, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a suggestion. In the conference room, I gave them a heavily edited version of events. I emphasized the impersonator, the strange structure I'd found, and my concern for visitor safety. I omitted the creature's impossible nature, its shape-shifting abilities, and the portal. Instead, I suggested that perhaps the impersonator had been living off the grid in that remote part of the forest and had fled when confronted. And the knife? The sheriff asked, gesturing to the silver blade I'd placed on the table. Protection, I said simply. I wasn't sure what I was dealing with. Sheriff Blackwood didn't look convinced, but he also didn't press further. After taking my statement, he informed me that they would conduct a thorough search of the area I'd indicated, but in the meantime I was being placed on administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation. Standard procedure, he assured me, though his eyes remained suspicious. Given the stress you've clearly been under. I didn't argue. In truth, I welcomed the break. I needed time to process what had happened, to research, to prepare. Because despite the destroyed structure, despite the creature's apparent defeat, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. After the police left, Sean and Nathan cornered me in the locker room. Okay, what really happened out there? Sean demanded, his voice low. And don't give us the sanitized version you fed the sheriff. I looked between them, my friends, my colleagues, people I trusted with my life. They deserved the truth, as unbelievable as it was. So I told them everything. The creature's shifting form, its impossible abilities, its plans to replace me, the portal, the confrontation, the silver knife that somehow wounded it when bullets passed through harmlessly. When I finished, silence hung heavy in the room. I expected disbelief, maybe even concern for my mental state. Instead, Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. My grandmother was Potawatomi, he said quietly. She gave me this when I started working here. Said the forests in this region were special. That they contained doorways to other places, other realities. That creatures from those places sometimes crossed over. He opened the pouch, revealing a small piece of polished silver fashioned into a crude arrowhead. Protection, he explained. I always thought it was just a superstition, a story to keep children from wandering too deep into the woods. Sean ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. So, what now? Do we report this? Who would even believe us? No one, I said firmly. At least no one official. We'd end up on psychiatric leave or worse. For now we keep this between us. We research, we prepare, and we watch for signs that it or others like it have returned. Others, Nathan repeated, his face pale. You think there are more? I thought of the creature's final words. Others will come, others always come. And the cycle it mentioned. Ian Mercer in the 70s, Logan Braithwaite in the 90s, now me. A pattern spanning decades, perhaps centuries. I think we've stumbled onto something ancient, I said. Something that's been happening in these forests long before this was a state park. And I think it's our responsibility now to understand it and stop it if we can. In the weeks that followed, administrative leave gave me the freedom to dive deep into research. I started with the historical archives, pulling every record I could find about unusual occurrences in the Kettle Moraine region. Sean and Nathan helped, using their active status to access records I couldn't reach. A pattern emerged, stretching back not just decades but centuries. Native American legends about skinwalkers and shape-shifting spirits. Early settler accounts of doppelgangers and forest devils. Modern reports filed under various labels. Bigfoot sightings, Beast of Bray Road encounters, UFO reports. Different names, different eras, but similar descriptions. Entities that could mimic human appearance but moved wrong. Structures found deep in the woods. People who disappeared, sometimes replaced by something that looked like them but wasn't quite right. I created a map, marking every reported incident across the region. The pattern was unmistakable, a rough circle centered on the Kettle Moraine area with the highest concentration near where I'd encountered the creature. At night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I saw those bottomless black orbs staring back at me, felt those two long fingers reaching for me. I took to sleeping with the silver knife beside my bed, its strange etchings now a comfort rather than a mystery. 3 weeks into my leave, Sean called me in the middle of the night, his voice tight with tension. "We've got another report," he said without preamble. "Hikers spotted a ranger fitting your description near Eagle Trail yesterday." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I haven't been near the park in weeks." "I know," Sean replied grimly. "And that's not all. We found another structure, Mason. Just like the one you described, but smaller, like it's just beginning." "Where?" I demanded, already reaching for my clothes. "North section, near the glacial formations. Nathan's keeping an eye on it, but we thought you should know." "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said, grabbing the silver knife. "Don't approach it, wait for me." As I drove through the dark forest roads toward the ranger station, my mind raced. The creature I'd fought was gone. I was certain of that, but its final words echoed in my memory. "Others will come." The cycle was continuing, just as it had warned. But this time, I wasn't unprepared. This time, I knew what I was facing. When I arrived at the station, Sean was waiting with Nathan. Both looked exhausted, their faces drawn with worry. "Show me," I said simply. They led me to Nathan's truck, and we drove in tense silence to the north section of the park. As we hiked through the pre-dawn darkness, flashlights illuminating the trail ahead, Nathan explained what they'd found. It started with reports of strange noises 3 days ago. Visitors described it as something between a howl and a scream. Then yesterday, the hiker sightings of you patrolling an area you couldn't have been in. "We decided to investigate," Sean continued. "Found the structure about 2 miles off the main trail, hidden in a dense section of pines. It's smaller than what you described, but the construction is identical. Logs and branches arranged in that teepee formation." "Any symbols on the ground?" I asked, remembering the glowing blue etchings. "Not that we could see," Nathan replied. "But there's something else, Mason. Something we didn't tell you over the phone because it sounds crazy even to us." I stopped, turning to face them. "What is it?" They exchanged glances before Sean spoke. "There are items arranged around the structure. A ranger hat, a flashlight, a pair of boots." "My things?" I asked, confused. I'd been careful to secure my home, installing new locks and even a basic security system after the encounter. "No," Nathan said quietly. "They belonged to Logan Braithwaite." The name hit me like a physical blow. Logan Braithwaite, the ranger who disappeared in the 90s, whose case file I'd read, who had reported a doppelganger before he vanished. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Those items would have been removed after his disappearance. It's been over 30 years. "They look brand new," Sean said, his voice tight. "The hat still has his name written inside. The flashlight works like it was just bought yesterday." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the pre-dawn cold. If these were indeed Logan's possessions, preserved somehow for 3 decades, it suggested something far more terrifying than I'd imagined. Not just that these creatures could cross between worlds, but that they could somehow manipulate time or preserve objects or people outside of normal temporal flow. "We need to destroy the structure," I said firmly. "Now, before it grows stronger." They nodded in agreement, and we continued our hike, moving faster now, a sense of urgency driving us forward. As we approached the coordinates, the forest changed subtly around us. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The wildlife fell silent, just as it had during my previous encounter. And then we saw it, a crude structure of logs and branches, smaller than the one I'd encountered but unmistakably similar in design. Around its base, just as Sean and Nathan had described, lay items that could have belonged to a ranger from the 90s, an older model of flashlight, a style of hat no longer used, boots of a design that had been discontinued years ago. But what chilled me to the bone were the fresh additions to the collection. A coffee mug identical to one I owned, a modern flashlight of the exact make and model as mine, a photo that looked like it had been taken from my cabin. The creature, or another like it, wasn't just building a new doorway. It was targeting me again, using the same method of collecting personal items to strengthen its connection. "We need to destroy it now," I said, drawing the silver knife, "before it's completed." Sean pulled out a can of accelerant he'd brought from the ranger station. "Fire?" I nodded. "Fire and silver seem to affect the last one. Let's hope it works on this structure too." As Nathan and Sean prepared to douse the structure with accelerant, I examined the items arranged around its base, particularly those that resembled my possessions. The coffee mug wasn't actually mine. It was similar, but the handle was a slightly different shape. The flashlight was the right model but lacked the scratch on the barrel that mine had. The photo was of me, but taken from an angle that suggested it had been shot from a distance without my knowledge. Imitations, not the real items. The creature hadn't been to my cabin this time. It was working from observation, creating facsimiles rather than stealing the originals. That suggested it was weaker or at least earlier in its cycle than the one I'd confronted before. "Ready," Sean called, having doused the structure thoroughly. I raised the silver knife, prepared to slash at the support logs as I had with the previous structure, when a sound froze us all in place, the crunch of footsteps approaching through the forest. We spun toward the sound, flashlights raised, the beams cut through the pre-dawn darkness, illuminating a figure moving toward us through the trees. A ranger, wearing a uniform identical to mine, with my face, but this mimicry was flawed. The movements too stiff, the proportions slightly wrong. It was as if the creature had only observed me from a distance, never getting close enough for perfect replication. "Burn it," I ordered Sean and Nathan, raising the silver knife. "Now, I'll handle this." As they scrambled to light the structure, I advanced toward my doppelganger, the silver knife held before me like a talisman. "I know what you are," I called out. "Your kind tried this before, it failed." The creature tilted its head, studying me with eyes that didn't quite match mine, too dark, too unblinking. "Failed," it said in a voice that was almost but not quite my own. "No, merely delayed. The cycle continues, Ranger Mason, always continues." The creature and I circled each other in the pre-dawn forest, a macabre dance of predator and prey, though which was which remained to be seen. Behind me, Sean and Nathan worked frantically to set the structure ablaze, the sharp smell of accelerant cutting through the damp forest air. "You're not the same one I fought before," I said, keeping the silver knife between us. "You're newer, weaker." The doppelganger's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile on a human face. On this imperfect copy it looked grotesque, like a child's attempt to mimic an expression it didn't understand. "Different vessel, same essence," it replied. "We are many in one. What you destroyed was merely a shell, a projection. The core remains. A collective consciousness. Then, not individual creatures but aspects of a single entity, able to manifest multiple forms simultaneously." The implications were terrifying. "And Logan Braithwaite?" I demanded, gesturing toward the items around the structure. "What happened to him?" The creature's eyes, almost but not quite my own, gleamed with something like amusement. "He serves, as the one called Ian serves. As you will serve." "Serves how?" I pressed, trying to keep it talking while Sean and Nathan finished their work. "Where are they?" "Between," the creature said simply. "Not here, not there. Between worlds where time flows differently. Their knowledge feeds us. Their essence strengthens us. A prison dimension of some kind. Or were they absorbed somehow, their consciousness preserved while their physical forms were destroyed? Either possibility was horrifying. Behind me, I heard the whoosh of flames catching. The creature's head snapped up, its gaze fixing on the now burning structure. Its expression contorted with rage, and something close to fear. "No," it snarled, lunging forward with inhuman speed. I slashed with the silver knife, catching it across the chest. Unlike my previous encounter, where the silver had caused smoking wounds in the creature's flesh, this time the blade passed through with only minor resistance, like cutting through dense fog rather than solid matter. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Its form rippled, my features briefly giving way to glimpses of something else beneath. Not the fur-covered monstrosity I'd fought before, but something less defined, more ethereal. A projection rather than a physical manifestation. It recovered quickly and darted past me, heading for the burning structure. Sean and Nathan backpedaled, raising their arms defensively, but the creature ignored them. It reached the flames and, impossibly, plunged its hands directly into the fire. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The flames, instead of burning the creature, seemed to be absorbed by it. Its form grew more solid, more defined, as if the fire itself was feeding it energy, accelerating its manifestation. "The doorway," I shouted to Sean and Nathan. "It's using our fire to open the doorway faster." Understanding dawned on their faces. Nathan grabbed a fallen branch and began beating at the flames, trying to extinguish them, while Sean used his jacket to smother smaller patches of fire. But it was too late. The structure, though partially burned, now glowed with that same eerie blue light I'd seen before. The symbols I'd expected appeared, etching themselves into the ground around the base, not drawn there by any hand, but manifesting directly, like frost patterns spreading across glass. The air grew dense, electric, the same sense of reality thinning that I'd experienced during my first encounter. The creature stood within the burning structure, unharmed by the flames, its form solidifying by the second. Its mimicry of my appearance was improving rapidly, the proportions correcting themselves, the movements becoming more fluid, more human. "The cycle accelerates," it intoned, its voice deepening, gaining resonance. "The doorway opens, others come." From within the flames, shapes began to emerge. Indistinct at first, like heat mirages, but gradually taking form. Human silhouettes. Two of them, stepping through fire that should have incinerated flesh but left them untouched. As they emerged fully into our reality, I recognized them from photographs I'd seen in the archives. Ian Mercer, the ranger who disappeared in the 70s. Logan Braithwaite, missing since the 90s, both wearing ranger uniforms from their respective eras, both moving with the same unnatural precision as my doppelganger. But their eyes were wrong. Completely black, without whites or irises, and their expressions were blank, empty of any human emotion or awareness. "What have you done to them?" I demanded, horror and rage building in my chest. My doppelganger's smile widened. "Made them vessels, preserved their knowledge. Their bodies serve us now, as yours will soon." Vessels, not the men themselves but empty shells, puppeted by whatever consciousness controlled these creatures. The real Ian and Logan were likely long gone, their minds consumed to feed this parasitic entity. Sean and Nathan fell back to my position, their faces pale with shock and fear. "Mason," Sean whispered, "what the hell do we do now?" I gripped the silver knife tighter, my mind racing. Silver had wounded the creature before, but this manifestation was different. Less physical, more ethereal. Fire, rather than destroying the doorway, had accelerated its opening. We needed a new approach. The structure continued to burn, the blue glow intensifying with each passing second. The three figures, my doppelganger, the things wearing Ian and Logan's forms, stood side by side, watching us with those bottomless black eyes. "The silver," Nathan said suddenly. "The symbols on your knife, they match the ones on the ground." I looked down at the blade in my hand. He was right. The strange etchings that had appeared on the knife after my first encounter mirrored exactly the symbols now glowing around the burning structure. An idea formed, desperate, possibly suicidal, but the only option I could see. "Cover me," I told Sean and Nathan, handing Sean my flashlight. "Blind them if they come for you. They don't like direct light." "What are you going to do?" Nathan asked, his voice tight with fear. "Close the doorway," I replied, "permanently." Before they could stop me, I charged toward the burning structure, the silver knife held before me like a talisman. The three figures moved to intercept, their movements perfectly synchronized, as if controlled by a single mind. Sean followed my instruction, directing his flashlight beam directly into the face of the Logan thing. It recoiled, raising an arm to shield its eyes, momentarily stunned. Nathan did the same with the Ian thing, creating an opening for me to slip past. My doppelganger was faster, interposing itself between me and the structure. Its form rippled as it abandoned the pretense of humanity, elongating, expanding, becoming something that defied description, a mass of shifting shadows and half-formed limbs. I slashed with the silver knife, aiming not for the creature but for the air beside it. The blade seemed to catch on something invisible, and a sound like tearing fabric filled the clearing. The creature howled, that same multi-tone shriek I'd heard before, as if multiple throats were crying out in unison. The tear widened, revealing not darkness but a shifting, kaleidoscopic light, colors that didn't exist in our reality, patterns that hurt the eyes to look upon, the space between worlds laid bare by the silver blade. The creature lunged for me, its form distorting as it moved, but I ducked beneath its grasp and rolled toward the burning structure. The heat was intense, but I forced myself forward toward the center where the blue glow was brightest. Behind me, Sean and Nathan shouted warnings, but their voices seemed distant, muffled by the roaring of the flames and the unnatural silence that pressed in around the doorway. The three creatures converged on me, moving with that eerie synchronicity. The things wearing Ian and Logan's forms flanked me, while my doppelganger approached head-on, its features now completely inhuman, a nightmare collage of shifting parts. "You cannot close what has always been open," it intoned, its voice resonating from everywhere at once. "The doorway exists in all times, all places. We have always been here. We will always be here." "Maybe," I acknowledged, raising the silver knife. "But not in this forest, not while I'm ranger here." With all my strength, I drove the silver blade into the center of the burning structure, directly into the heart of the blue glow. The knife sank to the hilt, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then reality seemed to bend around the blade. The blue light intensified to a blinding brilliance, and the symbols on the ground and on the knife itself began to move, flowing like liquid mercury, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The three creatures froze, their forms wavering like heat mirages. A sound built around us, not physical but something felt in the bones, in the teeth, in the very core of our beings, a frequency that didn't belong in our world. "What have you done?" My doppelganger hissed, its form becoming increasingly unstable. "The key, you've turned the key." I had no idea what it meant, but the panic in its voice told me I'd done something significant. The knife, the silver blade with its mysterious etchings, wasn't just a weapon against these creatures. It was a key to their doorway, capable of not just opening, but also locking it. The structure collapsed inward, the flames extinguishing as if starved of oxygen. The blue light contracted to a single point, pulling the three creatures toward it with inexorable force. They fought against it, their forms stretching, distorting, but the pull was too strong. "This isn't over," my doppelganger snarled as its form began to unravel, drawn thread by thread into the collapsing doorway. "The cycle will continue. Others will find other doorways, other keys." "Not here," I said firmly. "Not in my forest." With a sound like a thunderclap, the doorway closed completely. The blue light vanished, the symbols faded, and the forest returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after what we'd witnessed. Where the structure had stood, only the silver knife remained, embedded in the ground. Around it, in a perfect circle, the earth was scorched black, as if subjected to heat far beyond what the small fire could have generated. Sean and Nathan approached cautiously, their flashlights sweeping the area for any sign of the creatures. "Are they gone?" Sean asked, his voice hoarse. I nodded slowly, for now. But the doppelganger was right about one thing. This isn't over. There are other doorways, other manifestations. What do we do? Nathan looked at the scorched circle, his expression troubled. "Report this? Who would believe us?" "We protect the forest," I said, kneeling to retrieve the silver knife. "We watch for signs. We learn everything we can about these creatures, these doorways, and we close them when we find them." "The three of us against interdimensional shapeshifters," Sean said with a weak laugh. "Great odds." "We're not alone," I replied, thinking of the symbols on the knife, the way it had acted as a key to the doorway. "Someone made this knife. Someone knew about these creatures long before us. We just need to find them." As dawn finally broke over the forest, casting long shadows through the trees, we made our way back to the ranger station. None of us spoke much. What words could possibly encapsulate what we'd experienced? I knew our lives had changed irrevocably. We'd glimpsed something ancient and terrible, something that existed in the spaces between worlds, that had been preying on humans, on rangers specifically, for generations. But we'd also discovered a weapon against them, a key that could lock their doorways, and perhaps, if we could decipher the symbols on the blade, a way to find others who fought this same secret war. When we reached the station, I called Sheriff Blackwood. I told him we'd found evidence of the impersonators' camp in the north section, but that it had been abandoned and partially burned. Not a lie exactly, but far from the full truth. He seemed satisfied with the explanation, and the following day, my administrative leave was lifted. I returned to active duty with a new purpose, not just to protect the forest from human threats, but from something far older and more dangerous. In the months that followed, we established a routine. Regular patrols of the remote areas where the structures had appeared. Research into local legends and historical accounts of similar phenomena. Careful monitoring of visitor reports for any mention of ranger doppelgangers or unusual structures. We found 3 more incipient doorways in that first year. Small structures just beginning to form in the most remote parts of the forest. Each time we closed them using the silver knife, preventing them from fully manifesting. The symbols on the blade became our focus. Nathan's grandmother, with her Potawatomi heritage, helped us understand some of the markings, ancient protective sigils, boundary markers between worlds, warnings to those who might cross. Other symbols remained mysterious, but we continued our research, piecing together a fragmentary understanding of what we faced. We never saw my doppelganger again, nor the things wearing Ian and Logan's forms, but sometimes, in the deepest parts of the forest, when the mist rolls in and the shadows grow long, I feel eyes watching me from between the trees. And occasionally, hikers still report seeing a ranger who looks almost but not quite like me, patrolling areas where I've never been. The cycle continues, as the creature said it would, but now we're ready. Now we understand what we face, and as long as I'm ranger here, as long as I draw breath, I'll protect my forest from the things that lurk between worlds, the ancient entities that wear human faces but are anything but human. Because that's what rangers do. We protect, we serve, we stand guard at the boundaries, not just between wilderness and civilization, but between worlds, between realities. And sometimes, on the darkest nights when the wind whispers through the pines and the shadows seem to move with purpose, I stand at the edge of the forest with the silver knife in hand, and I send a message to whatever watches from the spaces between. Not here. Not in my forest. Not while I'm ranger. When I worked as a park ranger, I thought the scariest thing about the job would be mountain lions, until I met the things that hunt mountain lions. My name is Thomas Blackwood, and for 6 years I've patrolled the vast primeval wilderness of 6 Rivers National Forest in Humboldt County, California. The towering redwoods here are ancient sentinels, some over 2,000 years old, forming a dense canopy that filters sunlight into ethereal beams piercing the perpetual twilight of the forest floor. These woods are my office, my sanctuary, and eventually they became my nightmare. The locals have always whispered stories. The indigenous tribes spoke of the wild ones who walked like men but were not men. Loggers reported strange howls that didn't match any known wildlife. Hikers occasionally came back with bizarre stories of feeling watched, of massive footprints, of strange structures of broken trees that no human could have assembled. I dismissed it all as folklore and overactive imaginations. People come to the wilderness expecting mystery, so they find it. The human mind is wired to see patterns, to find faces in random shapes, to attribute purpose to coincidence. I prided myself on my rationality, my scientific understanding of the ecosystem I protected. "Thomas, we've got another report of damaged camping equipment up by Harper's Creek," my supervisor Logan said one morning in early October as I checked in at the ranger station. "Probably bears again, but could you head up there and check it out?" "On it," I replied, grabbing my pack. "Anyone injured?" "No, just scared," said something large moved through their camp around 3 a.m., tore open their food storage even though they hung it properly. I nodded. This was routine. Visitors frequently underestimated black bears' determination and ingenuity when it came to accessing food. I documented dozens of similar incidents over the years. The drive to Harper's Creek took almost an hour along winding Forest Service roads. The campsite was empty when I arrived, the visitors having packed up and fled back to civilization after their frightening night. I parked my truck and began examining the area. The campsite showed clear signs of disturbance. A food container had been ripped open with considerable force, its contents scattered. What immediately struck me as odd was the height at which their food bag had been suspended nearly 15 feet up between two trees approximately 20 feet apart. Black bears can certainly climb, but the branch the visitors had used was thin and would likely have broken under a bear's weight. I circled the perimeter of the campsite, looking for tracks. The ground was covered in redwood needles and relatively dry, making prints difficult to find, but near the creek bed I discovered something that made me pause. A clear impression in the soft mud. A footprint nearly 16 inches long and 8 inches wide. It resembled a human foot but was far too large, with 5 distinct toe impressions. I took photographs and made a plaster cast, telling myself it must be a hoax or perhaps overlapping bear tracks creating an illusion. As I worked, the forest fell silent. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just the soft sighing of wind through the towering redwoods. The silence was absolute, oppressive, and entirely unnatural. Every instinct I'd developed over years in the wilderness screamed danger. I stood slowly, suddenly aware of being watched. The sensation was overwhelming, a tangible pressure against the back of my neck. I turned gradually, scanning the tree line and saw nothing, but the feeling remained. "Hello," I called out, feeling foolish. "Park ranger, anyone there?" No response, just that heavy, pregnant silence. I packed up my equipment with deliberate calm, refusing to give in to the irrational urge to run. Whatever was watching, bear, mountain lion, or merely my imagination, running would only trigger a predatory response. As I walked back to my truck, a powerful stench hit me. A blend of wet fur, musk, and something rotten. It was unlike any animal I'd encountered, stronger than bear or mountain lion, with undertones that seemed almost human, but corrupted somehow. I drove back to the station with the windows down, trying to clear the smell from my nostrils and the unease from my mind. Logan examined the plaster cast with skepticism. "Bigfoot you've got here," he joked, not realizing the weight his casual words carried. "Probably just some campers messing around, making fake prints. Happens every summer." "Maybe," I agreed, but I wasn't convinced. The print had subtle details, dermal ridges, natural asymmetries that would be difficult to fake, and it didn't explain the unnatural silence, the feeling of being watched, or that distinctive odor. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the day's events, researching large animal tracks native to Northern California, and telling myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe it was a bear walking in its own tracks, elongating the impression. Maybe the smell was from a nearby carcass I hadn't spotted. Maybe the silence was simply a coincidence, a hawk or eagle passing overhead temporarily scaring smaller creatures into stillness. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and sat on the porch of my small cabin on the edge of the forest. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the absence of light pollution, a quarter moon providing just enough illumination to silhouette the massive trees surrounding my property. From deep within the forest came a sound that made my skin crawl, a long, warbling howl that started low and rose to a pitch impossible for human vocal cords to produce. It wasn't a wolf or coyote, It wasn't a mountain lion's scream. It was something else entirely. Something that had no place in my scientific understanding of these woods. The howl was answered by another, further away but similar in its otherworldly quality. Two creatures, communicating across the vast darkness of the forest. As October progressed, I would learn they weren't alone, and they were getting closer. The next few weeks brought an unusual spike in incident reports. Hikers described finding elaborate structures of broken and twisted trees deep in areas rarely visited. Backpackers reported their camps being circled at night by something large enough to shake the ground with each step. A wildlife photographer's expensive trail cameras were found crushed, the memory cards missing. I investigated each report with increasing unease. The tree structures particularly disturbed me. Massive branches and even whole trunks stacked in complex formations that couldn't have occurred naturally. Some were over 15 feet tall, with the heaviest logs positioned at the top, an arrangement that would require tremendous strength and planning to construct. "Who would come all the way out here to build these things?" asked Megan, a fellow ranger who accompanied me to document one particularly elaborate structure near Bluff Creek. "No idea," I said, examining the fresh breaks in wood too thick for a human to snap. "But whoever or whatever did this is strong." Megan snapped photos, shaking her head. "Vandals with tools, maybe, though I don't see any saw marks or axe cuts." I didn't share my growing suspicion that no human had built these structures. The breaks in the wood showed evidence of being twisted and wrenched apart rather than cut, requiring strength far beyond human capability. The following day, I decided to set up my own wildlife cameras in areas where incidents had occurred. If someone was hoaxing Bigfoot evidence or vandals were damaging the forest, I was determined to catch them. I installed 5 high-end cameras with motion sensors and night vision capabilities, carefully concealing them to prevent theft or detection. 3 days later, I returned to check the footage. The first 4 cameras showed nothing unusual. Deer, raccoons, a family of black bears, normal forest activities. But the 5th camera, positioned near one of the strange tree structures, contained something that changed everything I thought I knew about these woods. At 2:47 a.m., something massive moved in front of the camera. The infrared imaging showed a hulking figure at least 8 feet tall, moving with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for its size. It paused, seeming to sniff the air, then turned directly toward the camera. The face was only partially visible, heavy brow ridge, deep-set eyes reflecting the infrared light, a broad flat nose and a mouth set in what looked like a permanent grimace. The creature stared directly into the camera for nearly 30 seconds, as if aware of being recorded, then reached out with startling speed. The video ended abruptly. When I found the camera the next day, it had been carefully removed from the tree and placed on the ground, lens facing downward, undamaged but deliberately disabled. I told no one about the footage. Not because I feared ridicule, though that was certainly a consideration, but because some instinct warned me that drawing attention to these creatures might provoke them. Instead, I began keeping a detailed journal of all incidents and evidence, cross-referencing locations to establish patterns of movement and behavior. A map of 6 Rivers National Forest soon adorned my living room wall, dotted with pins marking encounter sites. The pattern was clear. The activity centered around the most remote regions but was gradually expanding outward, closer to popular hiking trails and camping areas. More troubling, there appeared to be multiple creatures, moving in what seemed like a coordinated pattern. On a crisp morning in late October, I received a call about a dead mountain lion found near Eagle Creek. Mountain lion deaths weren't uncommon. They fought over territory, suffered injuries while hunting, or occasionally were hit by vehicles on forest roads. But something in the dispatcher's voice told me this was different. "The research team says it's weird, Thomas. They asked specifically for you to come take a look." I drove to the coordinates provided and met Dr. Rebecca Chen, a wildlife biologist studying predator populations in the national forest. Her usual composed demeanor was visibly shaken. "I've never seen anything like this," she said, leading me to the carcass. This was a healthy adult male, nearly 200 pounds. Something killed it with ease. The mountain lion lay on its side, neck broken and twisted at an impossible angle. What struck me most wasn't the killing method. Powerful predators like bears could certainly kill a mountain lion in the right circumstances, but the fact that nothing had fed on the carcass, whatever killed this apex predator, hadn't done so for food. "There are some strange marks on the body," Rebecca continued. "Handprints, almost, but that's impossible." She pointed to distinct impressions on the mountain lion's hide where something with tremendous strength had gripped it. The spacing of the marks suggested fingers, not claws, with a span far wider than any human hand could reach. "What do you think did this?" she asked, her scientific curiosity momentarily overcoming her unease. I hesitated, unwilling to voice the impossible conclusion forming in my mind. "I'm not sure. I said finally. Could be a territorial dispute with a bear, though it's unusual that it wasn't eaten. Rebecca nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. The killing method is all wrong for a bear. Bears use their claws and jaws. This looks like it was killed by something that grabbed it and twisted. Something with hands. As we finished documenting the site, I noticed fresh tracks leading away from the carcass, the same enormous footprints I'd found weeks earlier. They headed deeper into the forest, toward an area so remote, even seasoned rangers rarely ventured there. That night, the howling started again, closer to my cabin than ever before. I sat in darkness, listening to the inhuman calls echoing through the ancient trees, and realized with growing dread that I was hearing a hunt in progress. The creatures were communicating, coordinating, moving through the forest with purpose. They weren't just surviving in these woods. They were claiming territory. By early November, I could no longer keep my findings to myself. The situation was escalating. 3 hikers had gone missing in the past week alone, last seen entering a remote trail near where I documented the highest concentration of unusual activity. Search and rescue operations were underway, but I knew they were looking in the wrong places and were dangerously unprepared for what they might encounter. I requested an emergency meeting with the Forest Service management team, bringing my journal, photographs, plaster casts, and the video footage. Logan assembled the senior staff in the main conference room, his expression a mixture of concern and skepticism as I set up my materials. "This better be important, Thomas," he said. "We've got search teams in the field and a lot of worried families waiting for news." "It's important," I assured him, taking a deep breath. "And it's directly related to the missing hikers." For the next 30 minutes, I presented my evidence methodically, trying to maintain a professional scientific approach. I showed them the footprint casts, the photographs of tree structures, the pattern of incidents I'd mapped, and finally, the video. When I finished, the room was silent. Park Superintendent Richard Marshall removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Let me get this straight," he said finally. "You believe a group of Sasquatch Bigfoot is hunting in 6 rivers and may be responsible for our missing persons?" Put so bluntly, it sounded absurd even to my ears, but I stood firm. "I know how it sounds, but the evidence..." "The evidence is circumstantial at best," interrupted Diane Peterson, our regional wildlife manager. "Footprints can be faked. Those tree structures could be made by people. And that video, it's grainy dark, could be anyone in a costume. Who would go that deep into the backcountry in a costume just to stage a few seconds of footage that no one was even supposed to find?" I countered. Logan, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "Thomas, you're one of my best rangers. You've always been level-headed, rational, but this is a huge leap." "I know what I saw," I insisted. "And I know what killed that mountain lion wasn't a bear or another cat. Whatever these creatures are, they're territorial, they're strong, and they're getting bolder." Marshall sighed heavily. "Here's what we're going to do. We'll increase patrols in the areas you've identified, but we'll focus on looking for the missing hikers and any human activity that might explain these incidents. No mentions of Bigfoot to the press or the search teams. The last thing we need is panic or a flood of thrill seekers coming to look for monsters." It wasn't the response I'd hoped for, but it was better than outright dismissal. At least they were taking the increased danger seriously, even if they disagreed about its source. As the meeting broke up, Rebecca pulled me aside. "I believe you saw something," she said quietly. "The mountain lion kill wasn't natural, but we need more concrete evidence before making extraordinary claims." "Will you help me get that evidence?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "I have some equipment, better cameras, audio recorders, even thermal imaging that might help document whatever's out there. But we need to be careful. If these are territorial predators of any kind, provoking them could be dangerous." Over the next few days, Rebecca and I established a series of monitoring stations in the areas where I'd noted the most activity. We used her university credentials to borrow state-of-the-art equipment, including acoustic monitors capable of picking up infrasound, low-frequency sounds below human hearing, that elephants and other large mammals use for long-distance communication. Meanwhile, the search for the missing hikers continued without success. Dogs lost their scent trails at bizarre locations, as if the hikers had simply vanished or been lifted from the ground. Helicopter sweeps with thermal imaging revealed nothing in the dense canopy. As each day passed, hope diminished. On the 5th night of our monitoring project, the acoustic equipment picked up something extraordinary. Rhythmic infrasound pulses coming from 3 different locations, forming a triangular pattern around a remote valley. The pattern was too regular to be natural, suggesting deliberate communication between multiple sources. That same night, one of Rebecca's thermal cameras captured heat signatures of 3 large bipedal figures moving through the forest in single file. They were massive, estimated at over 7 feet tall based on comparison with surrounding trees, and moved with a swift fluid gait that covered ground with remarkable efficiency. "This is unprecedented," Rebecca whispered as we reviewed the footage the next morning. The scientific part of her mind had taken over, temporarily overriding her fear. If these are undocumented primates, it would be the zoological discovery of the century. "They're not just undocumented," I said grimly. "They're hunting. Look at their movement pattern. They're heading directly toward the area where the hikers were last seen." We took our new evidence back to Superintendent Marshall, who finally agreed to bring in outside expertise, a renowned primatologist and a specialist from the FBI's Missing Persons Division. Both experts examined our evidence and agreed that something unusual was happening in Six Rivers, though neither would explicitly endorse the Sasquatch theory. The FBI agent, Special Agent Michaels, was particularly concerned by the pattern of disappearances. "Whether we're dealing with unknown wildlife or human predators," he said, "these disappearances show planning and coordination. I'm authorizing a full-scale search operation with armed personnel." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope that we might be taken seriously. But as we prepared for the expanded search, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The creatures were growing bolder, coming closer to populated areas, seemingly unafraid of human presence. That night the howling started again, but this time it was close enough to rattle the windows of my cabin. I stood on my porch listening to the otherworldly calls echoing through the ancient redwoods when I noticed something that turned my blood to ice. The forest had gone completely silent again. No insects chirping, no nightbirds calling, no small animals moving in the underbrush. Just that oppressive waiting silence I'd experienced at Harper's Creek weeks before. And beyond the tree line, just at the edge of visibility in the moonlight, something massive moved between the trunks of two towering redwoods. Something that walked upright, its silhouette unmistakably neither human nor bear. It was watching me, and somehow I knew with bone-deep certainty that tomorrow it would no longer be content to watch. Dawn broke with a heavy mist clinging to the redwoods, reducing visibility to less than 50 feet. I'd barely slept, keeping vigil by the window after the activity outside my cabin. The search operation was scheduled to begin at 0800 hours, with teams converging from multiple access points around the area where we detected the most activity. I arrived at the ranger station early to find it buzzing with activity. FBI agents, Forest Service personnel, local search and rescue volunteers, and a small team of wildlife experts were preparing equipment and reviewing maps. Agent Michaels was dispatching teams, his voice crisp and authoritative. "Thomas," he called, waving me over. "I want you with Alpha Team. You know this terrain better than anyone, and you've had the most direct experience with whatever we're dealing with." I nodded, checking my pack one last time. Standard ranger equipment, plus Rebecca's thermal imaging monocular and a satellite phone. Despite Michaels's insistence, I refused to carry a firearm. If these creatures were what I believed, some undocumented species of great ape or primitive hominid, I wouldn't be responsible for harming one unless absolutely necessary for survival. Alpha Team consisted of myself, Agent Michaels, 2 experienced trackers from the local Yurok tribe, and a wildlife biologist specializing in large predators. We would be entering the forest from the northwest, heading toward the remote valley where the acoustic monitors had detected the infrasound communications. The mist hadn't lifted when we set out, lending an eerie quality to the ancient forest. Massive redwood trunks loomed out of the fog like the columns of some primeval temple, their tops lost in the swirling white. Sound behaved strangely, sometimes muffled to near silence, other times carrying with unnatural clarity. We moved quietly, the trackers leading the way, occasionally stopping to examine broken vegetation or disturbed ground. About 3 miles in, one of them, an older man named Joseph, knelt to examine something on the forest floor. "Look," he said simply, pointing to a clear footprint pressed into the damp earth. It matched the casts I'd made, 16 inches long, humanoid but massive, with 5 distinct toes and a pronounced arch. Michaels photographed the print from multiple angles, his expression tightening. "How fresh?" "Very," Joseph replied. "Hours, not days, and there are more." He pointed ahead where a line of similar prints led deeper into the fog-shrouded forest. We followed the tracks cautiously, finding more evidence as we progressed. Broken branches high above where humans could reach, tufts of coarse dark hair snagged on bark, and occasionally that distinctive musky odor that had first alerted me to something unusual in these woods. Around midday we reached a small clearing where the tracks suddenly multiplied and overlapped, as if several creatures had gathered there. The ground was heavily disturbed, with deep impressions suggesting significant weight. Most concerning were the scraps of fabric, torn pieces of what appeared to be a blue hiking jacket scattered around the clearing. "One of our missing hikers was wearing a jacket like this," Michael said quietly, bagging a piece as evidence. The wildlife biologist Davis had been unusually quiet throughout the trek. Now he spoke, his voice strained. In 20 years studying predator behavior, I've never seen anything like this. These aren't typical predation patterns. There's intelligence here, strategic thinking. We radioed our findings to the other teams and continued following the trail, which now headed directly toward the heart of the valley. The fog was beginning to lift, but the forest remained unnaturally silent. No birds called, no small animals rustled in the underbrush. Even the insects were quiet. It was as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. As we descended into the valley, the forest changed subtly. The trees here were older, more massive than those in the rest of the national forest. The undergrowth was thinner, creating an almost park-like setting beneath the towering canopy. And then we began to notice the structures. Tree trunks and massive branches had been arranged in complex formations throughout the valley. Some formed rough shelters, others seemed to mark boundaries or paths, and still others had no obvious purpose but displayed clear evidence of deliberate arrangement. None showed signs of tools being used, no cut marks or saw lines, just raw physical strength used to break and position massive pieces of wood. "My God," whispered Davis. "It's a habitat. They've been modifying the environment." Joseph nodded grimly. "My grandfather spoke of the forest people. Said they were here before us, that they shaped the woods to their needs. No one believed the old stories." We moved deeper into the valley, documenting everything with cameras. The structures became more numerous, more complex. We found areas where the ground had been deliberately cleared, small spring-fed pools that had been deepened and lined with stones, and most disturbingly, caches of what could only be described as trophies, weathered backpacks, cameras, watches, and other human items collected over what must have been decades. Michaels radioed the other teams again, but received only static in response. The satellite phones similarly failed to connect. We were cut off, either by the geography of the valley or by some other interference. "We need to leave," Joseph said suddenly, his body tense. "Now." "What is it?" I asked, but even as the words left my mouth I felt it too, that unmistakable sensation of being watched that had haunted me for weeks. "We're surrounded," Joseph said quietly. We formed a tight circle, backs to each other, scanning the forest around us. The silence was absolute, now heavy and pregnant with menace. Nothing moved, yet the sensation of hostile eyes grew stronger with each passing moment. Then I saw it, partially obscured behind a massive redwood trunk about 50 yards away, a huge figure standing upright. As I watched, it stepped slowly into a shaft of sunlight breaking through the canopy, and for the first time, I got a clear view of what had been stalking these woods. It stood at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in thick dark reddish-brown hair. The build was powerfully muscular but proportioned more like a human than an ape, with long arms ending in large 5-fingered hands. The face was the most unsettling feature, a blend of human and ape characteristics with a pronounced brow ridge, deep-set eyes that reflected intelligence, a flat, wide nose, and a mouth set in what looked like a permanent grimace. It stared directly at me, and in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that this was no animal, at least not in the way we typically define them. There was self-awareness in those eyes, calculation, and something else I couldn't quite name, something ancient and profoundly alien to human experience. "Don't move," I whispered to the others. "Don't run." As if responding to my voice, the creature tilted its head slightly. Then it made a sound. Not the howl I'd heard from a distance, but a series of deep resonant vocalizations that seemed to contain structure and rhythm, almost like speech. From the forest around us came answering calls, at least 3 distinct voices positioned to cut off any escape route. We were completely surrounded, trapped in the heart of their territory. The lead creature took a step forward, its massive feet leaving deep impressions in the soft forest floor. It made another series of vocalizations, this time gesturing with one hand in what was unmistakably a deliberate communication. Joseph, to my surprise, responded with a similar gesture and a vocalization of his own, a deep, throaty sound unlike any human language I'd ever heard. "What are you doing?" Michaels hissed. "Old stories," Joseph replied tersely. "The elders said they understand respect. I'm showing we mean no harm." For a tense moment nothing happened. Then the creature made another sound and took another step forward. Joseph tensed beside me. "That's not good," he whispered. "It's challenging us." The standoff stretched for what felt like eternity. Our small group frozen in place as the massive beings watched from the forest around us. I could hear Davis's ragged breathing, see the sweat beading on Michael's forehead despite the cool air. Then, in a blur of movement almost too fast to track, the lead creature charged. The creature covered the 50 yards between us with shocking speed, moving with a fluid grace that belied its massive size. In the split second before impact, I made a decision that would later seem either incredibly brave or phenomenally stupid. I stepped forward to meet it, arms spread wide in a non-threatening posture, making direct eye contact. "We mean no harm," I shouted, the words feeling pitifully inadequate against the primal force bearing down on me. The creature skidded to a halt just feet away, towering over me, its breath hot and rank on my face. Up close, its presence was overwhelming. The sheer physical power, the intelligence burning in those deep-set eyes, the alienness of a being that seemed to exist in a realm between human and animal. I held its gaze, fighting every instinct screaming at me to run. Behind me, I heard the metallic click of Michael's drawing his weapon. "Don't," I said sharply, not breaking eye contact with the creature. "That will only provoke them." The standoff continued for several heartbeats. Then something unexpected happened. The creature slowly raised one massive hand and pointed directly at the camera hanging around my neck, the one containing weeks of documentation including footage of their kind. It made a series of sounds different from the vocalizations before, shorter, more emphatic. Then it extended its open palm toward me, the gesture unmistakable even across the species barrier. "Give it to me." With trembling fingers, I removed the camera strap from my neck and placed the device in the creature's enormous hand. Its fingers closed around the camera, crushing it effortlessly, components spilling to the forest floor. "It understands what the camera does," Davis whispered in astonishment. "It knows we're documenting them." The lead creature made another vocalization, and from the surrounding forest more of its kind emerged, 7 in total, varying in size but all massive by human standards. They formed a loose semicircle around us, effectively cutting off retreat. Joseph continued making low, rhythmic sounds, gesturing occasionally with open palms. The creatures watched him with what seemed like wary interest. Gradually, the tension in the air shifted, not disappearing entirely, but changing from imminent violence to cautious assessment. The lead creature, at least 8.5 feet tall and clearly the dominant member, made a series of gestures toward the valley behind us, then pointed emphatically back the way we had come. The message couldn't have been clearer. "Leave. Now." "They're giving us a chance to go," Joseph said quietly. "We should take it." Michaels, his hand still hovering near his weapon, glanced at me. "What about the missing hikers?" As if understanding the question, the lead creature made another sound and gestured to one of the smaller members of the group. This one, perhaps 7 feet tall but more lightly built, disappeared briefly into the forest and returned carrying something that made my blood run cold. 3 torn and bloodied backpacks, recognizable as belonging to the missing hikers. The message was brutally clear. The hikers were gone, and we would be too if we didn't leave immediately. "We need to go," I said quietly to Michaels. "We're completely outmatched here." For a tense moment, I thought the agent might resist, might insist on trying to recover remains or evidence. But one look at the creatures surrounding us, their massive strength, their obvious intelligence, their home territory advantage, convinced him of the futility of such an attempt. "Slowly back away," he ordered. "No sudden movements." We began retreating carefully, never turning our backs on the creatures. They watched our withdrawal with unnervingly human expressions, not just aggression but calculation, curiosity, and something that looked disturbingly like contempt. As we reached the edge of the clearing, the lead creature made one final vocalization, a long, complex series of sounds that rose and fell in what could only be described as speech. Then it turned and melted into the forest with shocking silence for something so large, the others following suit until we were alone again in the ancient redwood grove. The journey back was tense and silent, each of us processing what we'd witnessed. The forest gradually returned to life around us, birds calling, insects buzzing, the normal sounds of wilderness slowly replacing the unnatural silence that had marked the creature's presence. When we finally reached the rendezvous point, we found the other teams waiting anxiously, having failed to radio us for hours. Their experiences had been less dramatic but no less unsettling. Strange sounds, glimpses of massive figures moving through the trees, and a pervasive sense of being watched by hostile eyes. The debriefing at headquarters lasted well into the night. Maps were marked, testimonies recorded, theories proposed and rejected. The few physical pieces of evidence we'd managed to bring back, hair samples, plaster casts of footprints, the torn fabric from the hikers' clothing, were carefully catalogued for analysis. In the end, the official conclusion was both a triumph and a defeat. The existence of an unknown species in Six Rivers National Forest was tentatively acknowledged. The evidence was simply too compelling to dismiss entirely. But the full truth of what we'd encountered, their intelligence, their territorial behavior, their clear understanding of humans and our technology, was deemed too extraordinary for public disclosure without further scientific verification. "We need more evidence," Marshall insisted. "Controlled studies, DNA analysis, peer-reviewed research. Until then, this stays classified as an unidentified wildlife incident with potential danger to visitors." The search for the missing hikers was officially categorized as suspended pending new information. Their families told only that evidence suggested a fatal wildlife encounter in a remote area. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. The areas where we'd documented the most activity were quietly closed to the public, ostensibly for environmental restoration and endangered species protection. Additional ranger patrols were authorized, always in groups, always armed, with strict instructions to observe and report but not engage. As for me, I requested a transfer to a different district within 6 Rivers. Not out of fear, though that would have been reasonable enough, but because I understood something fundamental about our encounter. We had been allowed to leave. The creatures could have easily killed us all, but instead they had issued a warning, established a boundary. They didn't want conflict. They wanted space to be left alone in their ancient territory. My new cabin sits on the western edge of the forest, far from the valley where we had our encounter. I still work as a ranger, still patrol the majestic redwood groves, still help visitors appreciate the beauty and mystery of these ancient woods. But I never hike alone anymore, and I never venture near the areas now marked on official maps with innocuous designations like Research Natural Area or Wilderness Preservation Zone. Sometimes, on particularly still nights when the fog rolls in from the Pacific and wraps the redwoods in its ghostly embrace, I hear them, those distinctive howls echoing across the valleys, carrying through the mist like voices from a primeval world that exists alongside our own but separate from it, hidden in plain sight. They're still out there watching from the shadows of the ancient trees, moving silently through their territory with a grace and power that defies human understanding. They were here long before us, and they'll likely remain long after we're gone. The last echoes of a time when humans weren't the only intelligent species walking upright on this planet. When I worked as a park ranger, I thought the scariest thing about the job would be mountain lions, until I met the things that hunt mountain lions. Now I understand that the truly frightening thing isn't their existence. It's the realization that they've been there all along, and we simply refuse to see them. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. Some secrets of the forest are meant to stay hidden in the shadows of the ancient redwoods, howling their warnings to those wise enough to listen.